"Grandma, this house isn't yours anymore." My 12-year-old grandson said. That is how I found out my own son had sold my home. My name is Gloria Bennett. I am 66 years old, a retired public school teacher in Maplewood, Ohio. The man who sold my house is my son, Darren Bennett, the boy I raised under that roof, the boy whose height we marked on the inside of the pantry door every birthday, the boy I once believed would grow into a man who understood the meaning of the word responsibility. He sold our house while my husband and I were on vacation. Walter and I had been gone 10 days, celebrating our 40th anniversary. Portugal, ocean air, grilled fish, and strong coffee. We held hands like we were still 30 and foolish enough to think time would always be generous. We came home lighter and walked straight into betrayal. The taxi turned onto Birchwood Lane just after 4. I saw the real estate sign first, white and red, planted in my yard like a warning flag. Then the lockbox hanging from my front door. Then Darren's car in the driveway. He was sitting on the porch steps when we arrived. He stood slowly, like a man about to give a speech. Walter stepped out of the taxi first, stretching carefully, one hand briefly touching his chest the way he does when he's tired. I followed, my suitcase rolling behind me. "What's going on, Darren?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at his son, and that was when Jaden said it. "Grandma, this house isn't yours anymore." His voice was flat, practiced. My heart didn't race. It stilled. "Dad said you signed the papers," Jaden continued. "He said you're old and don't really understand all that legal stuff." Walter inhaled sharply. I felt it more than heard it. Darren smiled, almost indulgent. "It's done, Mom. I sold it. I had debts. Serious ones. I used the power of attorney you and Dad signed. I closed 2 weeks ago." "You sold our house," Walter said, his voice low. Darren shrugged. "You're homeless now, but look on the bright side. You just got back from vacation. Think of this as an extended one." He laughed. That laugh did something to my husband. Walter Bennett is not a violent man. He worked 35 years at the post office. He fixes broken hinges for neighbors. He still thanks waitresses by name. But there are certain lines that, once crossed, tear something loose inside a man. Before I could move, Walter stepped forward and struck Darren across the face. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a single, open-handed blow. The sound cracked through the quiet street. For one suspended second, no one moved. Darren's head snapped sideways. Then he straightened slowly, his expression transforming. Not shocked, not ashamed. Furious. "You hit me?" he spat. "You think you get to hit me after everything I've dealt with?" Walter's chest was rising too fast. "You don't talk to your mother like that," he said, but his voice trembled. Darren shoved him hard in the shoulder. Walter stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing on the edge of the walkway. "Stop." I stepped between them, my hands up. Neighbors' curtains twitched. I could feel eyes, and then Darren did something that hurt more than the shove. He turned, kicked the edge of my flower bed, and sent a spray of soil into the air. My breath left me. That flower bed was not decoration. It was memory. I had planted it the spring after my mother died. White lilies and blue hydrangeas, her favorites. Every year I knelt in that soil and tended it like I was tending something sacred. Darren stomped again, crushing the hydrangeas beneath his heel. "Don't you dare!" I lunged toward him. He grabbed my arm roughly and yanked me back. "Mom, stay out of it," he snapped. His grip tightened. Pain shot up my shoulder. But I twisted free and dropped to my knees in front of the flower bed, using my body to shield what was left. "Stop it!" I cried, not screaming, pleading. "Darren, stop!" He cursed at me, words I had never heard come from his mouth before. "You're the reason I'm in this mess. You and your control, your rules." He swung his arm in frustration. It struck my shoulder hard enough to knock me sideways into the dirt. I tasted soil. Walter tried to move forward, but I saw the strain in his face, the dangerous flush creeping up his neck. "Walter, don't!" I gasped. Darren stepped back, breathing heavily, chest rising and falling like a man who had just finished a race. And then came the second blow, not physical, but worse. Jaden. He was standing near the porch, eyes wide, not frightened of his father, frightened of me. "Dad said you don't care about us," he said, his voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "He said you'd rather have your stupid house than your own family." The word stupid lodged somewhere deep in my chest. I looked at my grandson, at the boy I had taught to tie his shoes, the boy who once cried in my kitchen because he thought he'd disappointed me over a math test. Now he looked at me like I was the villain in a story he'd already decided. I realized then that Darren hadn't just sold a house. He had rewritten the narrative. To his son, I wasn't a grandmother defending her home. I was an obstacle, a selfish old woman clinging to property instead of love. The soil stained my palms, the crushed hydrangeas lay bent and broken. Darren straightened his shirt, composure returning in slow layers. "Get a hotel," he said coldly. "I'll send you the details of your share." Your share. As if we were dissolving a business partnership instead of dismantling a life. I pushed myself to my feet, pain radiating through my shoulder. I did not cry. I looked directly at my son. "Darren," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "The house you sold wasn't actually yours to sell." His jaw tightened. "Don't start." "I'm not starting," I replied. "I'm finishing." Walter stood beside me, breathing unevenly but upright. Jaden avoided my eyes. For the first time since we'd stepped out of that taxi, I understood something clearly. This wasn't desperation. This was calculation. Darren believed speed would outrun consequence. He believed intimidation would silence resistance. He believed shame would keep us quiet. He did not understand the woman he was standing in front of. I have spent 31 years teaching children how to read truth beneath performance. I know what it looks like when someone thinks they've won. We did not enter that house that afternoon. I could not step past the lockbox while my son stood there claiming ownership. Instead, Walter and I returned to the taxi and asked to be taken to the Holiday Inn on Route 40. In that small motel room with thin walls and rattling air conditioning, Walter sat on the edge of the bed, fists clenched, breathing slowly to steady his heart. I washed the dirt from my hands in a sink that smelled faintly of bleach, and as I watched the brown water swirl down the drain, I felt something inside me shift. My shoulder ached. My flowers were broken. My grandson's words replayed in my mind like a wound that refused to close. But beneath the pain was something harder. To one. Resolve. If Darren thought humiliation would make me surrender, he had miscalculated. Fear can paralyze, or it can clarify. And as I dried my hands on a thin white towel in that motel bathroom, I made myself a promise. He may have taken my house, but he was not going to take my dignity. If you felt this moment, please like the video and comment where you're watching. From someone near you might be watching this story at the same time. Not from me, and not from the child who would one day learn the truth. The Holiday Inn on Route 40 smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and old carpet. It was the kind of place people stayed when their plans had shifted unexpectedly: road construction, a missed connection, a funeral they hadn't prepared for. Not the kind of place you check into because your son has sold your house and stomped your mother's hydrangeas into the dirt. Walter sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. I had seen that posture before. The first time was in a hospital room 4 years ago, when a cardiologist used words like blockage and intervention and lifestyle adjustment. The second was when we buried our second dog under the oak tree. Walter does not fall apart. He folds inward. "I shouldn't have hit him," he said quietly. I sat across from him in the stiff armchair by the window. The parking lot lights flickered on outside as dusk settled over Maplewood. Cars pulled in and out, ordinary life moving forward, indifferent to the fracture in ours. "You hit him because he laughed," I said. "You hit him because he called us homeless." Walter swallowed. "That's not a word a son should use." No, it wasn't. I replayed the scene in my mind, the lockbox, the crushed flowers, Darren's hand on my arm, Jaden's voice carrying accusations that were not born in his own heart. My shoulder throbbed where Darren had grabbed me. I pressed a cold washcloth against it and let the ache ground me. Pain has a way of clarifying. "Gloria," Walter said after a long silence, "how does this even happen?" I leaned back and closed my eyes for a moment. I am not a lawyer. I am a retired English teacher. But I understand documents. I understand language. And I understand that what people think a paper means and what it actually means are often two very different things. "It happens," I said slowly, "when someone moves fast and hopes you won't question the fine print." 4 years ago, after Walter's first cardiac episode, we had met with an estate attorney. We had signed a limited power of attorney giving Darren authority in the event of a medical emergency. We had also established a family trust on the advice of that same attorney to protect our assets and simplify inheritance. We were not reckless people. We were prepared people, which meant that if Darren had used the power of attorney to sell the house, then one of two things was true. Either he had more authority than he should have, or he had acted beyond it and hoped no one would notice. "Do you think he's right?" Walter asked quietly. "About the papers?" I looked at him. No. The certainty surprised even me. Not because I knew every clause of every document by heart, but because I knew this. Darren had not called us. He had not discussed listing the house. He had not asked for consent. He had not even attempted to explain his so-called debts before selling the roof over our heads. That was not the behavior of someone acting within clear authority. That was the behavior of someone gambling on silence. I stood and walked to the small desk in the corner of the room. I opened my suitcase and took out my leather folder, the one I carry important papers in when we travel. Inside were copies of our trust documents and the contact card of our estate attorney, Mr. Richard Hawthorne. I ran my fingers over the card. Mr. Hawthorne was in his 70s, meticulous, old school, the kind of man who still sent Christmas cards signed in blue ink. He had prepared our trust 11 years ago and walked us through it carefully, page by page. If anyone could tell me whether Darren had the authority he claimed, it was him. Walter watched me from the bed. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said, sitting at the desk and pulling out my phone, "that we don't call Darren tonight. We don't argue. We don't negotiate. We don't beg." Walter hesitated. "He's our son." "Yes," I said softly, "and that's exactly why we need to be careful. Family has a way of turning logic into emotion. Darren would want a conversation, not because he sought understanding, but because conversation buys time. It muddies details. It introduces doubt. It reframes theft as misunderstanding. I have mediated enough playground disputes to know that whoever tells the story first often shapes the narrative. Tonight, I would not give him that opportunity. Instead, I opened my notebook and began writing. Facts. We left on June 12. He claimed to have closed 2 weeks ago. Used power of attorney from 2019. Buyer unknown. Lockbox installed. Sign-in yard. I wrote slowly, deliberately. Writing organizes panic into sequence. Walter stood and paced once across the room. "What if we lose?" he asked. I paused. The truth is, I did not know yet whether we would win. I did not know if the deed had been properly transferred into the trust years ago. I did not know if a title company had reviewed the documents and deemed Darren's authority sufficient. But I knew something else. If we did nothing, we would certainly lose. "If we lose," I said quietly, "then we lose fighting, not folding." Walter sank back onto the bed. He nodded once. Outside, a truck rumbled past on Route 40. The motel walls felt thin, as if they might dissolve under pressure. I understood, in that moment, what it meant to be displaced, not just physically, but socially. In Maplewood, people notice. People talk. Word would travel quickly that the Bennetts had lost their house, that their son had sold it. Humiliation was part of Darren's calculation. He had expected us to be too ashamed to push back. I closed the notebook and picked up Mr. Hawthorne's card again. "I'm calling him in the morning," I said. Walter nodded. "And Gloria," he added after a moment, "don't let him use my heart." I looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" "He'll say the stress isn't good for me. He'll say court will make it worse. He'll say you're risking my health." He wasn't wrong. Darren knew our vulnerabilities. He knew which strings to pull. I crossed the room and sat beside my husband. I took his hand, steady and warm despite the tremor earlier. "Your heart," I said, "is not a bargaining chip." He squeezed my fingers. We sat in silence for a long time. I thought about Jaden, about the way he had repeated Darren's words, about the flicker of uncertainty I had glimpsed before Darren touched his shoulder and anchored him back into loyalty. Children believe what they are told, especially when the storyteller is a parent. Darren had already begun shaping the narrative. Greedy grandmother, stubborn old woman, house over family. That cut deeper than the bruise on my arm. I stood and walked to the mirror above the sink. My reflection looked older than it had 10 days ago. There was dirt still faintly embedded beneath my fingernails from the flower bed. I scrubbed again until the skin turned pink. "They were your mother's flowers," Walter said softly behind me. "Yes," I replied. white lilies and blue hydrangeas. I had planted them the spring after Mama died. Every year they bloomed right around her birthday. Darren knew that, which meant stomping them was not impulsive. It was symbolic. He had wanted to make a point. So would I. I turned off the bathroom light and slipped into bed beside Walter. The sheets were stiff. The air conditioner rattled. Somewhere down the hall, a television blared faint laughter from a sitcom. "I'm not afraid," I said into the dark. It wasn't entirely true. I was afraid of courts, of legal fees, of public scrutiny, of the possibility that paperwork might favor Darren's interpretation. But fear and surrender are not synonyms. "I know," Walter murmured. I lay awake long after his breathing evened out. In my mind, I walked back through the past 11 years. The meeting in Mr. Hawthorne's office when we established the trust. Darren, sitting at the long oak table, nodding politely, signing the attendance sheet, listening as Mr. Hawthorne explained asset protection. Darren had not been excluded from the process, which meant he could not plausibly claim ignorance. The thought settled into place slowly, like a puzzle piece sliding into alignment. He believed speed was power. He forgot that paper leaves trails. I reached for my phone in the dark and set an alarm for 8 a.m. Tomorrow, I would begin with one phone call. Silence can be surrender, or it can be the first deliberate move. I closed my eyes and chose which one mine would be. I was awake before the alarm. The motel coffee maker gurgled like it had a grudge, and the first cup tasted like warm cardboard, but it gave my hand something to hold while my mind ran its laps. Walter sat at the small table by the window, peeling a banana with the slow care of someone who'd slept but hadn't rested. "How's your shoulder?" he asked. "Sore," I said. "Not broken." He nodded, as if he could file that under manageable. Walter has always been a man who organizes fear by sorting it into categories. What can be fixed? What must be endured? What deserves prayer? I opened my leather folder and slid Mr. Hawthorne's card onto the table between us. "I'm calling him," I said. Walter's eyes tracked the card. "You think he'll answer?" "It's Tuesday," I replied. "He's always in his office by 8. I stepped outside to make the call. The air in the motel parking lot already carried heat, the kind that promised a sticky afternoon. Cars idled. A woman in scrubs hurried toward her sedan. A man with a cooler loaded ice into the trunk of a pickup. People moving through their days with purpose, unaware that my entire life was sitting in a stranger's lockbox across town. When Mr. Hawthorne's receptionist answered, her voice was bright and practiced. I gave my name, and I didn't dress it up. "This is Gloria Bennett," I said. "It's urgent. It's about our house on Birchwood Lane and the Bennett Family Trust." There was a pause, just a breath long, but it told me everything. She recognized the trust name. She recognized the weight in my voice. "Hold, please," she said softly. Mr. Hawthorne came on the line less than 5 minutes later. He sounded exactly as I remembered, calm, slightly gravelly, the voice of a man who has spent decades translating panic into procedure. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, and then, gentler, "Gloria, tell me what happened." So I did. I told him we returned from vacation to a real estate sign and a lockbox. I told him Darren claimed he had sold our home using the power of attorney from 2019. I told him he laughed when he said we were homeless. I told him Walter hit him. Darren destroyed my flower bed, and when I tried to stop him, he struck me hard enough to knock me into the dirt. I did not give him poetry. I gave him sequence. Mr. Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment. "Did Darren provide you with any documentation?" he asked finally. "Closing papers, a notice, a copy of the deed transfer?" "No," I said. He provided a smile. "That's what I thought," he replied, not unkindly. "All right, I need you and Walter in my office this morning. Bring whatever you have. And Gloria, do not contact Darren." Walter stepped out of the room when I returned, reading my face the way he always has. "We're going," I told him. We drove to Mr. Hawthorne's office in my car, a 10-year-old sedan that still smelled faintly of the lavender air freshener I'd hung from the mirror. Walter insisted on driving. I watched his hands on the steering wheel, steady but a little too tight. "Breathe," I said quietly when his shoulders rose. "I am," he muttered, and then gave me the smallest smile, like an apology for being scared. Mr. Hawthorne's office sat on Garrison Street, in one of those older brick buildings downtown, with narrow stairwells and framed certificates on every wall. The waiting room smelled like wood polish and paper. Serious rooms always do. When we walked into his office, he didn't waste time on pleasantries. He had 2 file folders open on his desk already, and his reading glasses sat low on his nose. He greeted Walter first, hand firm, eyes assessing. Then he turned to me. "Gloria," he said, and his gaze flicked briefly to the bruise blooming beneath my collarbone. He didn't ask about it. He didn't need to. The law sees bruises as evidence. So do good people. "Let's start with the trust," he said. He pulled out a thick document, the Bennett Family Revocable Living Trust, executed 11 years ago. I recognized my signature, Walter's too. He flipped to the schedules listing assets, the section that, in plain English, was supposed to say what belonged to the trust. He pointed to the entry. "Birchwood Lane is listed," he said. "The house was intended to be held by the trust." Walter leaned forward. "Then Darren couldn't sell it." Mr. Hawthorne held up one finger. "Not so fast. The trust document shows intent, but the question is what the county recorder shows as title holder." He slid a printout across the desk. It looked ordinary, just lines of typed text, book and page numbers, dates, but my stomach tightened anyway. "According to the public record," he said slowly, "the deed is still in your personal names." Walter blinked. "That can't be right." "It shouldn't be," Mr. Hawthorne agreed. "But it happens, more than people realize." I stared at the paper. My mind wanted to reject it, the way the body rejects a splinter. We had done the responsible thing. We had paid for the trust. We had sat at this very desk. We had followed instructions. "So, the deed was never re-recorded," I said, tasting the words. Mr. Hawthorne nodded once. "The trust was properly created. The transfer instruments were signed. But the deed itself, what the title company will rely on, still shows you two as individual owners." Walter's face tightened. "So Darren's power of attorney might look valid." "It might look valid," Mr. Hawthorne said carefully. "Which means a title company doing a routine review could have accepted it." My heart pushed once hard against my ribs. This was the part Darren had counted on. He had counted on the gap between intent and paperwork. He had counted on the fact that most people don't know the difference between a trust document and a recorded deed. He had counted on us being too overwhelmed to ask the right questions. I drew in a slow breath through my nose, the way I taught nervous students before presentations. "What do we do?" I asked. Mr. Hawthorne's expression didn't soften, but his voice did. "We get information. First, we identify the buyer. Second, we identify the title company. Third, we move quickly to prevent resale." "Prevent resale," Walter repeated. Mr. Hawthorne nodded. "We file a notice of dispute, a cloud on the title. It won't resolve everything, but it will make it very difficult for whoever bought your home to sell it cleanly until this is sorted." I felt something steady click into place inside me. Not relief, not victory, momentum, the kind that comes when you finally see the next step in a dark hallway. "Who would buy a house like ours without meeting the owners?" I asked. Mr. Hawthorne tapped his keyboard, then turned the screen slightly. "I requested the transfer record from the county this morning." He read from it without drama, because drama is for television. Real consequences arrive in neutral fonts. "Buyer, Cornerstone Equity Solutions, LLC," he said. An LLC. Not a young couple starting a family. Not a retiree wanting a quiet porch. A company. "What does that mean?" Walter asked. "It means," Mr. Hawthorne said, "that you're not dealing with sentiment. You're dealing with a business that likely buys properties fast and cheap. They may claim good faith. They may also be very motivated to avoid scrutiny." My mind flashed back to Darren's boot coming down on my hydrangeas, stomping what mattered to me because he believed nothing mattered except the transaction. Like father, like buyer, I thought cold, efficient, careless. Mr. Hawthorne slid a yellow legal pad toward me. "I'm going to prepare the notice today," he said. "I need you to sign an affidavit stating you did not authorize this sale, you were not informed, and you dispute Darren's authority to convey your property." He looked at Walter. "I also want a note from your cardiologist on record. Not because you're weak, Mr. Bennett, but because your condition is relevant to the power of attorney and any potential undue influence." Walter's jaw flexed. "I don't want my heart used." "It won't be," Mr. Hawthorne said. "It will be documented." He turned back to me. "And Gloria, hear me clearly. Do not confront Darren. Not in person. Not by phone. He'll try to pull you into an emotional argument. He'll try to threaten. He'll try to bargain. Let him talk to me. I thought of Jaden's voice, stiff with borrowed certainty, telling me I cared more about a house than family. I wanted to pick up the phone right then and call my grandson. I wanted to say, "Baby, Grandma isn't the one who did this. Grandma is trying to fix what your father broke." But children don't take truth from a voice they've been taught to doubt. Not at 12. Not when loyalty has been weaponized. I nodded. "I understand." Mr. Hawthorne gathered the papers into neat stacks. "Good," he said. "Then we move." As Walter and I stood to leave, he added, "One more thing. This isn't just a family problem, Gloria. This may be elder financial abuse. If it goes where it might go, it could become criminal." The word criminal hung in the air like a bell. Walter's hand found mine. His palm was damp. Outside, the sun was brighter than it had any right to be. Maplewood looked the same as it always did, shops opening, people walking, dogs, flags hanging from porches. And somewhere on Birchwood Lane, my son was probably sitting in my living room believing he had gotten away with it. He had no idea what we'd just set in motion. Back in the car, Walter exhaled long and slow. "So what now?" I looked straight ahead. "Now," I said, "we stop being the people he thought we were." My shoulder ached when I shifted. The bruise reminded me of Darren's hand. The memory of crushed hydrangeas reminded me what he'd tried to destroy. And the memory of Jaden's words reminded me why I couldn't afford to fold. Because if I surrendered quietly, the lesson my grandson would carry into adulthood would be simple and deadly. Whoever is bold enough to betray you gets to keep the prize. I stared out at the familiar streets and made myself colder, calmer, more deliberate. "Silence," I said softly, mostly to myself, was my first weapon. Walter glanced at me, and this time there was something in his eyes besides fear. Trust. By the time we pulled back into the motel parking lot, the air felt heavier. Not because the temperature had changed, because the truth had. Darren hadn't just gambled with our house. He had gambled on confusion. And confusion, I have learned, is the most profitable currency in family betrayal. Walter turned off the engine but didn't get out right away. He kept both hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. "You think he knew?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said. I didn't hesitate, because I remembered that meeting 11 years ago. Darren, sitting at Mr. Hawthorne's long oak conference table, listening, nodding, signing the attendance sheet when we formed the trust. He had been there, which meant if he claimed ignorance, it would not be an innocent mistake. It would be strategy. Back inside the motel room, I laid out every document Mr. Hawthorne had given us. The trust papers, the recorded deed printout, the draft of the affidavit we had signed stating clearly, "We did not authorize the sale, we did not consent. We dispute the authority used." Walter lowered himself carefully into the armchair. "So this cloud thing," he said, "it actually works?" "It slows things down," I answered. "And right now, slowing him down is power. A cloud on title." Such a gentle phrase for something so disruptive. Once filed, it would notify anyone, any lender, any buyer that the ownership of 417 Birchwood Lane was legally contested. Cornerstone Equity Solutions wouldn't be able to flip the property quickly without explaining the dispute. And companies that operate fast rarely enjoy scrutiny. My phone buzzed. Darren. Walter stiffened. I let it ring. It buzzed again immediately. Then again. "Answer it," Walter said softly. I shook my head. "No." The fourth call came with a voicemail notification before the ringing stopped. I waited a full minute before listening. His voice was different. No laughter now. "What did you do?" he demanded. "The title company just called me. They said there's some kind of notice filed. Mom, are you serious right now? You're blowing this up. You're going to ruin everything." Ruin everything. The irony might have been amusing if it hadn't been so bitter. He continued, voice tightening. "Do you have any idea what kind of people I owe? This isn't just about you and your flowers." I replayed that line twice. Not about your flowers. He still thought that was what this was. I set the phone down slowly. "He's scared," Walter observed. "Yes," I said. "Good." Walter studied me carefully. "Gloria," he said, "I don't want this turning into something dangerous." "It already is," I replied quietly. He struck me. He destroyed property. He forged authority. Walter flinched at the word forged. We hadn't used that word yet, But that was the shape of it. The afternoon dragged. Around 3, Mr. Hawthorne called. "The notice has been filed," he said. "The county recorder has stamped it. The cloud is official." I closed my eyes briefly. "How long before Darren knows?" I asked. "He already does," Mr. Hawthorne replied, "and so does Cornerstone." He paused. "I received a call from their counsel. They're asking questions." "Good," I said again. But inside, my pulse ticked faster. Cornerstone was not family. They would not care about sentiment or reconciliation. They would care about exposure, about liability, about whether they had purchased a problem disguised as opportunity, which meant Darren was no longer in control of the narrative. That mattered. After we hung up, Walter leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "I never thought I'd be in a legal dispute with my own child," he said. I walked to the small window and looked out at the parking lot. "When he laughed," I said softly, "that's when this stopped being about negotiation." Walter didn't answer. He didn't need to. Around 5 in the evening, there was a knock at the motel door. 3 sharp raps. Walter looked at me. I stood slowly and walked to the door without speaking. When I opened it, Darren was standing there. His jaw was tight. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from tears, but from anger. "You think you're clever?" he said immediately, stepping forward before I could block the doorway. "You think filing paperwork makes you righteous?" Walter rose behind me. "Don't," I said quietly to my husband without turning. Darren pointed a finger at me. "The buyer's lawyer is calling me nonstop. They're threatening to sue if this doesn't clear up. You don't understand what you've started." I met his gaze evenly. "I understand exactly," I said. His eyes flicked briefly to my shoulder where the bruise was now darker. For a moment, something like discomfort crossed his face. Then it vanished. "You could have talked to me," he snapped. "I tried," I replied, "on my porch." His nostrils flared. "You embarrassed me?" he said. I almost laughed. "You sold my house." He leaned closer. "You're going to regret this." There it was. Not apology, not remorse. Threat. Walter stepped forward despite my earlier warning. "You laid hands on your mother," he said, voice trembling with restrained fury. Darren looked at him coldly. "You hit me first." "And I'd do it again," Walter said. My heart slammed. "Walter," I warned. Darren's gaze shifted back to me. "You want to drag this through court? Fine, but don't expect to see Jaden. Don't expect him to visit. You think he'll want to come to the woman who's trying to put his father in jail?" The word jail hit harder than his hand had. He was already shaping the story. I felt it then, the deep, cutting grief of being cast as villain in my grandson's life. "You've already told him that," I said quietly. Darren's silence confirmed it. "Get out," I said. His jaw tightened. "You're choosing property over blood." "No," I said. "I'm choosing integrity over manipulation." He stared at me for 3 long seconds. Then he turned and walked away. Walter closed the door slowly. The motel room felt smaller afterward. "He's not going to stop," Walter murmured. "No," I said. And that was the moment something shifted again, not fear, not anger. Resolve deepened into strategy. Darren had escalated, which meant the next step had to be precise. I picked up my phone and texted Mr. Hawthorne. He just threatened to withhold our grandson and implied criminal exposure. The reply came minutes later. "Document everything." I sat down at the small desk and opened my notebook again. Time of visit. Exact words. Tone. Witness present. When you cannot control behavior, you control record. Walter watched me write. "You're very calm," he said. "No," I answered honestly. "I'm very focused. Because beneath the noise, beneath the humiliation, beneath the aching bruise and the broken hydrangeas and the poisoned words in my grandson's mouth, there was one clear truth. Darren had mistaken my silence for weakness. He had mistaken my age for fragility. He had mistaken love for surrender. And now, a legal cloud hung over Birchwood Lane. He thought he had moved fast. But paper moves differently than anger, and it lasts longer. The next morning, Walter woke up with a headache. He didn't call it that, of course. My husband doesn't like labels that sound like weakness. He sat on the edge of the motel bed with his elbows on his knees, rubbing his forehead slowly, as if he could press the pain back into place. "I'm fine," he said before I even asked. I set a cup of water beside him and slid 2 pills across the nightstand. "Take them anyway." He did, Quietly. No argument. That small surrender told me more than a dramatic confession would have. He was worn down. Not broken, but worn. I sat across from him in the stiff chair by the window and watched the parking lot wake up. A woman unloaded plastic grocery bags from a minivan. A man in a neon vest smoked beside a truck. A couple in their 60s walked a small dog that kept stopping as if the world might disappear if it didn't sniff every blade of grass. Ordinary life, moving forward like it always does, as if homes aren't sold out from under people and mothers aren't bruised by their own children. Walter cleared his throat. "Do you think he'll really keep Jaden from us?" "Yes," I said. "At least for now." Walter's face tightened. He looked older than he had 10 days ago, not because of wrinkles, but because of something heavier. The realization that the person you raised can become someone you don't recognize. "He knows what that does to you," Walter murmured. "He meant me, but he also meant himself." I nodded. "That's why he said it." The phone rang. Not Darren this time. A number I recognized from the contact list in my old group chat. Patrice. Patrice was Brenda's sister, Darren's wife's younger sister, the kind of woman who said she didn't like drama but somehow always knew where it lived. We weren't close, but we were friendly enough that she would answer if I called. I stared at the screen for a moment, then put it on speaker so Walter could hear. "Hello," I said. Patrice's voice sounded cautious, like she was stepping into a room where she wasn't sure if the floor was stable. "Mrs. Bennett." "Gloria." "Hi." "Hi, Patrice." A pause. "I heard you're back," she said. "From your trip." "Yes," I answered. I didn't offer more. Silence makes people fill it. Patrice exhaled. "Look, Brenda didn't tell me to call. I can't stop thinking about you. Are you okay? Where are you staying?" Walter's jaw clenched. I kept my voice even. "We're in a motel." "Oh my God," Patrice whispered, and the shock in her tone sounded real enough that my chest tightened despite myself. I didn't think it would get that far." That phrase, "get that far," was a doorway. I stepped through it carefully. "Patrice, what did you think would happen?" Silence. Then a soft, broken confession, like something slipping out before she could catch it. "I thought Darren would talk you into it," she said. "I thought you'd just let him do what he needed to do." "What he needed to do," Walter echoed, voice low. Patrice heard him and fell silent again. I spoke gently. "Patrice, I'm not asking you to choose sides, but I need to understand something. Darren said it was debts, business debts." Patrice made a sound, half sigh, half laugh, the kind people make when they know the lie but aren't sure how much truth they're allowed to reveal. "It's not business," she said. Walter's hand tightened on his knee. I kept my tone quiet. "Then what is it?" Another pause. Then the word came out, soft but unmistakable. "Gambling," Patrice said. "It's gambling. It's been a problem." The air in the room changed. It was as if Patrice had opened a window and cold air rushed in. Walter closed his eyes, just for a second. Not dramatic, just the reflex of a man receiving something he doesn't want to hold. "Are you sure?" I asked, though I already knew. Patrice hurried on, like she was afraid if she stopped I'd make her say more. "He's been going to the casino outside Dayton, the one off the highway. Brenda found out last year. There were promises, there were arguments, and then it got worse. He started borrowing, from people, not just banks." My stomach tightened. "People," I repeated. "Yes," Patrice said quickly. "And I'm not saying he's in danger or anything, but Gloria, these aren't normal debts. He panics, he lies, he gets mean. Mean." I stared at my bruised shoulder as if it might answer. Patrice's voice dropped. "He told Brenda he had it under control. He said he was going to fix it. And then you went on your trip, and I guess he saw an opening." An opening. That was the truth, stripped clean. My son didn't have a moment of madness. He had an opening. A window of time where his parents were out of reach, where a title company could process paperwork without our faces in the room, where he could convert our stability into his escape. Walter's voice came out rough. He used our home to cover his addiction. Patrice inhaled sharply. "Mr. Bennett, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said." "No," I interrupted, firm but not cruel. "You should have. Thank you." Patrice sounded close to tears now, or maybe just frightened of what she'd set in motion. Brenda will be furious if she knows I told you. I won't tell her you did, I said. But Patrice, listen. Did Darren ever talk about the house before we left? Did he mention selling it? Not to me, Patrice replied. But he asked me weird questions a few months ago, like, how fast do houses sell in your neighborhood, and if you had a trust? He said it like he was joking. My heart went cold in a familiar way. He'd been preparing. The call ended with Patrice whispering another apology and me saying sincerely, "Thank you for telling the truth." When I hung up, the motel room was quiet except for the rattling air conditioner. Walter stared at the wall. I didn't speak right away, because the word gambling did something important. It changed the moral math. A man drowning in medical bills is desperate. A man who loses his money at a casino is reckless. A man who sells his parents' home to pay off that recklessness is not confused. He is willing. And that meant my next steps could not be soft. Walter finally spoke, voice low. So it wasn't business. It was that. Yes, I said. He swallowed hard. And Jaden, he's hearing all of it. That was the ache beneath everything. Not just betrayal, but contamination, watching your grandson absorb the wrong lesson, watching your son teach him that lying is a tool and grandparents are obstacles. I stood and walked to the small desk. I opened my notebook and wrote one word at the top of a fresh page. Gambling. Then beneath it, I wrote what Patrice had said, as precisely as I could remember. Casino near Dayton. Borrowing from people. Promises. Panic. Mean. Walter watched me. Why are you writing that down? Because truth needs a spine, I said. He frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means, I replied, pen moving steadily, that this isn't just a family dispute anymore. It's a pattern, and patterns matter in court. They matter to lawyers. They matter to judges. They matter to prosecutors, if it goes that far. Walter's eyes widened slightly at prosecutors. I don't want him in prison, he said quietly. I stopped writing. I looked at my husband, the man who still bought birthday cards for our son even when Darren forgot to call on Father's Day. The man whose heart condition had made him softer in some ways, not harder. I don't want that either, I said. But Walter, I didn't choose where this goes. Darren did. Walter's throat worked. He nodded once, reluctantly. I returned to the page and kept writing. Then I opened my phone and texted Mr. Hawthorne. New information. Darren's debts are gambling-related. Source is Patrice, Brenda's sister. Likely casino near Dayton. Borrowing from individuals. Documenting. His response came quickly. Understood. Keep notes. Do not confront Darren. Let me handle communications. I stared at the message. Let me handle communications. That meant the next chapter of this would not be fought on porches or in motel hallways. It would be fought in offices and courtrooms and paper trails. But paper doesn't hug your grandson. Paper doesn't explain to a child that you didn't abandon him. Paper doesn't mend a relationship Darren was actively poisoning. I looked at Walter. We need somewhere more stable than this motel. He nodded. Ellen. Yes, I said. Ellen. Ellen Marshall wasn't just a friend. She was a retired principal who understood systems, who knew how to keep records, who knew which questions to ask and which people to call. And most importantly, Ellen would be a witness, not just to legal facts, but to the truth of what we were living through. That afternoon, I called her. She answered on the second ring. Gloria? I didn't waste time. He sold the house. Silence. Then Ellen's voice sharpened into the same tone she used to use when a teacher told her something unbelievable and she needed the exact details. Tell me everything, she said. I did. When I finished, she didn't offer pity. She offered logistics. You're coming here, she said. Tonight, you and Walter. Ellen. No, she cut in gently but firmly. This isn't a debate. You will not stay in a motel while your son plays landlord with your life. I felt my throat tighten. Not from weakness. From relief at being seen. We'll be there, I said. After I hung up, Walter exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath for days. And for the first time since the lockbox appeared on our door, I felt something besides anger and grief. I felt clarity. Darren had tried to make this about embarrassment, about family loyalty, about me being too old to understand paperwork. But now I understood the true story. He wasn't just in debt. He was in free fall, and he had dragged us with him because he believed we would cushion the landing. I gathered my notebook, my folder, and the few clothes we'd unpacked. I packed them with care, not because I felt calm, but because care is how I remind myself I still have agency. As Walter zipped the suitcase, he looked at me. "Gloria," he said quietly, "what if this breaks the family for good?" I paused. Outside the motel window, the sky was turning the soft orange of late summer. Somewhere in Maplewood, my flower bed lay crushed. Somewhere in that house, Darren was moving through our rooms like a man who believed he owned them. Somewhere, Jaden was hearing another version of me that I could not control. But I knew what I would not do. I would not teach my grandson that cruelty wins when it comes from family. I met Walter's gaze. "Some things," I said softly, "are already broken. All I'm deciding now is whether we leave the pieces where Darren threw them or whether we pick them up and rebuild with truth." Ellen Marshall lived 10 minutes from the motel in a neat brick ranch house with a screened-in porch and a front door that always looked freshly painted. When we pulled into her driveway that evening, her porch light was already on, glowing like a small, steady promise. She opened the door before we even reached the steps. "There you are," she said, as if we'd simply been late for dinner. Ellen was 68, sharp as a tack, a retired principal who still carried herself like she had a schedule to keep and standards to enforce. Her gray hair was cut close and practical. Her eyes took one quick inventory: Walter's posture, my bruised shoulder, our suitcases, and then she stepped aside. "Come in," she ordered gently. "Shoes off if you want. I made chicken soup and cornbread." My throat tightened. Not because I was fragile, because after 2 days in a motel, kindness felt like a shock. Walter went in first, moving carefully, still guarding his heart as if it might betray him at any moment. Ellen guided him down the hallway to her guest room and pointed to the bed. "You sit," she said. "I'm not asking." Then she turned to me and lowered her voice. "Gloria," she said, "tell me the truth. Did he hurt you?" I met her gaze. Ellen didn't deal well with half-truths. "Yes," I said. "He grabbed me. I fell. He struck me when I tried to protect my flower bed." Ellen's mouth tightened into a hard line. She didn't gasp. She didn't perform sympathy. She simply absorbed the fact the way she'd absorb a report of a dangerous student. "And the police?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. Ellen nodded once. "All right, we'll move wisely, but don't confuse restraint with silence." Those words landed in my chest like a small stone of strength. Dinner was simple. Bowls of chicken soup with noodles, cornbread still warm, butter softening into yellow pools. Ellen placed a pitcher of iced tea on the table and sat across from us with her hands folded, listening while I laid out everything again. Portugal, the lockbox, Darren's laughter, the punch, the crushed hydrangeas, Patrice's phone call, and the word gambling. Walter spoke less than I did, but when he did, his voice carried something rawer than anger. "I raised him," he said quietly, staring into his bowl. "I raised him to be better than this." Ellen didn't soften the moment with comforting lies. She simply said, "Then he chose otherwise." After dinner, she sent Walter to lie down and instructed me to sit at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, like we were back in the teacher's lounge after a long day, debriefing what went wrong and how to fix it. "Who's your attorney?" she asked. "Richard Hawthorne," I said. "Estate lawyer." Ellen nodded. "Good. Conservative. Careful." She pulled a legal pad from a drawer. "Now tell me what you have in writing." I blinked. "What I have in writing?" Ellen looked at me with that retired principal stare that used to silence entire hallways. "Gloria," she said, "you spent 3 decades teaching children that evidence matters. Don't forget your own lessons. What do you have in writing? What can be documented? What can be dated?" So I opened my notebook and showed her. The timeline. Darren's visit to the motel. His threat to keep Jaden away. The text I'd sent Mr. Hawthorne. The reply, "Document everything." Ellen read quietly, then nodded. "Good," she said. "Now, add one more thing." "What?" "Witness," she said. "From this day forward, you do not meet Darren alone. Not in a parking lot, not on a porch, not in a motel hallway, not anywhere." My skin prickled. "He already hit you," she continued, voice steady. "And he already knows the law is closing in. That's when people get sloppy. That's also when they get dangerous." I thought of the look in Darren's eyes outside the motel door, cold, controlled, willing to wound. Ellen pushed the legal pad toward me. Write down your attorney's number in big letters, she said. If Darren comes here, you do not argue. You do not explain. You do not defend yourself. You say one sentence and you repeat it until he leaves. I picked up my pen. What sentence? Ellen's mouth curved, not into a smile, but into something close to satisfaction. You can speak to my attorney, she said. That's it, like a broken record. You don't get pulled into the emotion. I nodded slowly. The house was quiet. A clock ticked. Outside, a lawn sprinkler hissed in a neighbor's yard. For the first time since returning from Portugal, the world felt structured again, as if order might still exist. It was almost 10 when Ellen walked me down the hallway to the guest room. If you wake up in the night, she said, and you start spiraling, you come sit in the kitchen with me. I've been through enough school board meetings to know what a crisis looks like. You don't have to carry this alone. I slept, but not deeply. Morning brought the smell of toast and the low murmur of a news anchor on Ellen's kitchen television. Walter was already up, sipping coffee, shoulders slightly less hunched than they'd been in the motel. Ellen slid a plate toward me. Eat, she said. I took 2 bites before the doorbell rang. Once, then again. Ellen's eyes flicked toward the front hallway. She didn't move fast. She moved deliberately, like someone walking into a situation she already understood. I stood. Walter rose behind me, hand drifting toward his chest. Ellen held up a palm. Stay. But I was already walking. Through the glass panel in the front door, I saw a silver Audi parked across the street. Darren. Beside him stood Brenda. They were dressed casually in the way people dress when they want to look harmless. Darren wore a plain t-shirt and jeans. Brenda wore a cardigan and sneakers, hair pulled back like she'd come to talk woman to woman, neighborly, reasonable. Darren held a small paper bag in his hand. From 5th Street Bakery. My bakery. The place I'd bought bread every Saturday for 20 years. The place where the older ladies behind the counter knew my name and asked after Walter's tomatoes every summer. Ellen opened the door before Darren could knock again. Good morning, she said, voice polite and cool. Darren's smile appeared quickly, too quickly, as if he'd practiced it in the car. Mrs. Marshall, he said, we just want to talk. No lawyers, no formal anything, just family. He stepped forward as if he belonged. Ellen didn't move out of the doorway. This is my house, she said, still polite. And you're on my porch, so you'll talk respectfully or you won't talk at all. Brenda's eyes darted to me. Gloria, she said softly, like we were friends. We didn't want to show up unannounced, but things are spiraling. I looked at the bakery bag. The scent of warm pastry drifted out faintly, sweet and familiar, like a memory Darren was trying to purchase. We brought you something, Darren said, lifting the bag. Your favorite, almond croissants. He said it with the same confidence he'd had when he laughed at us on the porch, confident that he knew exactly which button to press. My stomach tightened. It wasn't kindness. It was tactic. I opened the door wider. Not because I trusted him, because I wanted the confrontation in daylight on someone else's property, with a witness who wouldn't be intimidated by family titles. Come in, I said. Ellen stepped aside, but she stayed close, like a guard dog with manners. We sat at Ellen's kitchen table because the kitchen is where truth sits best. The bakery bag lay between us like a prop on a stage. Darren began with an apology carefully constructed, specific enough to sound sincere, vague enough to avoid admitting liability. I shouldn't have handled it the way I did, he said. I was under pressure. I was desperate. I'm sorry you got hurt. Sorry you got hurt. Not sorry I struck you. Not sorry I sold your home. Brenda leaned in, hands clasped. Gloria, we're not here to fight, she said. We're here to fix this before it becomes a war. A war, Ellen repeated quietly from the counter, where she pretended to rinse dishes. She wasn't pretending to listen. Her ears were sharp. Darren looked at me. The title company is freaking out. Cornerstone is threatening me. Your lawyer is making this worse. My lawyer is responding, I said evenly. To what you did. Brenda slid into the role Patrice had predicted. The reasonable negotiator. Marcus, she stopped herself, then corrected quickly. Darren is willing to arrange housing for you and Walter, she said. A suitable apartment. We'll pay the rent for 12 months while the legal stuff gets sorted, and we can talk about a financial settlement that makes everyone whole. Makes everyone whole. As if 42 years of life could be replaced with 12 months of rent. As if my hydrangeas could be uncrushed by a check. As if my grandson's voice could be unpoisoned by croissants. I stared at Darren. "Where is Jaden?" I asked. Darren's eyes narrowed slightly. "At school." "Does he know you're here?" I asked. Brenda answered quickly. "He doesn't need to be involved." But he already was. He was involved the moment Darren put words in his mouth. Darren pushed the bakery bag toward me. "Please," he said, voice softening. "Mom, just don't do this. Don't drag Dad into court. You know stress isn't good for him. You want his heart in the middle of a lawsuit?" There it was. Walter's heart. The lever Darren had tried twice already. I felt something tighten behind my sternum, anger, yes, but also sadness at how easily Darren reached for that weapon. Ellen turned from the sink and looked directly at Darren. "Don't," she said simply. Darren ignored her. "I made a mistake," he insisted, "but we can handle this privately. Like family. Do you really want our name in the paper? Do you want people talking? Do you want Jaden hearing his classmates say his father stole from his grandparents?" My hands were flat on the table. I kept them there, grounded. "You're already telling Jaden a story," I said quietly. I heard it on the porch. Darren's jaw worked. Brenda's eyes flickered quick, nervous. "Gloria," Brenda said, trying again, "think about your grandson." I held her gaze. "I am." And that was the truth. I was thinking about Jaden more than either of them deserved. Because I could see the lesson Darren was teaching him. If you do something wrong, you don't make it right. You intimidate people into silence. You buy their forgiveness with pastry and promises. You turn the victim into the villain. Darren leaned closer, voice dropping. "Mom," he said, "if you keep pushing this, you're going to lose more than the house." My pulse ticked faster. Ellen's chair scraped behind me as she shifted. I lifted my chin. "Say what you mean." Darren hesitated, then chose his words carefully, like a man trying to threaten without leaving fingerprints. "Jaden doesn't need to be around this," he said. "He doesn't need to be around you. Not if you're going to do this to his father." The room went very still. And then, like God has a strange sense of timing, the back door opened. Ellen's grandson, 16, tall, headphones around his neck, stepped in to grab something from the fridge, then froze when he saw strangers at the table. "Sorry," he muttered, and backed out quickly. But the moment had already done its work. A witness. Darren saw it too. He sat back, forcing a smile again, as if to regain control. "That's not what I meant," he said. But it was. I looked at the bakery bag, then at Darren, then at Brenda. "I'm not discussing this without my attorney," I said. Darren's smile tightened. "Mom." "No," I repeated. "You can speak to my attorney." Brenda's composure cracked just slightly. "Gloria, please." "You can speak to my attorney," I said again, calm as a metronome. Darren's eyes flashed just for a second, that same ugly flicker I'd seen when he stomped my flowers. "You're really going to do this," he muttered. "You already did," I replied. He stood abruptly, chair legs scraping hard. "Fine," he snapped. "Enjoy your little crusade." Brenda rose too, face pale, lips pressed tight. Darren didn't take the bakery bag. He left it on the table like a peace offering he could later claim he'd made. At the door, Darren turned back and looked at me with something colder than anger. "You're going to regret this," he said. Then he walked out. The door shut. The house exhaled. Ellen locked it without a word. Then she turned to me. "You held," she said simply. I stared at the bakery bag, unopened. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I opened it and looked inside. 2 almond croissants, golden and perfect, my favorites. Proof that Darren still knew exactly what I loved. And also proof that knowing what someone loves is not the same thing as loving them. I didn't eat them. I slid the bag into Ellen's trash can and pressed it down until it disappeared. My throat burned, and for the first time since Birchwood Lane, tears rose not because I was weak, but because I was grieving. Not the house. The boy Darren had been. And the boy Jaden was being taught to become. Ellen came beside me and placed a hand on my back. "You're not alone," she said. Walter stepped into the kitchen doorway, drawn by the raised voices he'd heard from the hall. His eyes moved from my face to Ellen's, to the locked front door. "Was that him?" he asked. "Yes," I said. Walter's mouth tightened. And he tried to buy our silence," I replied. and he threatened Jaden. Walter's shoulders sagged for a moment, then straightened again. "Then we keep going," he said quietly. I looked at my husband, tired, scared, but steady. Then I looked at Ellen, witness, shield, strategist, and I felt the story shift under my feet. Darren thought he could isolate us in a motel, break us with shame, and keep us quiet with fear. But now we had a home base. Now we had witness. Now we had momentum. And somewhere in all of this, my grandson was still hearing Darren's version of me. I couldn't control that today, but I could control what happened next. After Darren and Brenda left, Ellen's kitchen stayed quiet in that way it does after a storm passes. No thunder anymore, but the air still charged. Walter sat at the table with both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, not drinking it, just holding on. His eyes were fixed on the empty chair Darren had scraped back so violently. I could almost see the outline of my son's arrogance still sitting there, like a stain you couldn't wipe away. Ellen didn't rush to fill the silence. She rinsed a dish that was already clean. She wiped a countertop that didn't need wiping. That was her way of giving me space without abandoning me. I stared at her trash can for a long moment, at the bakery bag pressed down beneath paper towels and coffee grounds. 2 perfect almond croissants. A perfect lie. Walter finally spoke. He knew exactly what to bring. "Yes," I said. "And he knew exactly what to say," Walter added, voice rough. "About my heart." I nodded once. "That's why we don't talk to him without Hawthorne." Ellen turned from the sink. "And that's why you don't talk to him alone at all," she said, as if I hadn't heard her the first time. Walter looked at her. "He's not going to hurt her again." Ellen's gaze didn't blink. He already did. The truth landed hard in the room. Walter's jaw tightened. He was ashamed not of me, but of his inability to stop it. I understood that shame. Love wants to protect. When it can't, it turns inward. I reached for his hand. "Walter," I said softly, "you don't carry his choices on your back." He squeezed my fingers, but his eyes stayed damp. Ellen crossed her arms. "All right," she said. "We're going to do this like adults who intend to win." I almost smiled despite myself. Ellen's voice had that old principal authority, the tone that made teachers sit up straighter and parents stop arguing. "What do we do?" Walter asked. Ellen looked at me, not him. "First," she said, "you call your attorney and report exactly what happened here. The threat, the attempt to bargain, the mention of your grandson." "I already know," I said. "Document everything." "Good," Ellen replied. "Then do it." I picked up my phone and called Mr. Hawthorne. He answered quickly, as if he'd been expecting trouble. "Mrs. Bennett, it's Gloria," I said. My voice sounded steady, but my hands were cold. Darren came to Ellen's house. He brought a bakery bag. He apologized in vague terms. He offered to pay our rent for 12 months if we dropped the dispute. He repeated the pressure about Walter's heart, and he implied if we keep going, we'll lose access to Jaden. Mr. Hawthorne's silence was sharp, like a blade being drawn. "Was there any physical aggression?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not today." "Any direct threats of violence?" "Not direct," I replied, but the implication was clear. "Good," he said. "And you had a witness?" "Yes," I said. Ellen was there. Her grandson briefly entered the kitchen and saw them. "Excellent," Hawthorne said. "Gloria, you did well not engaging. Do not respond to any further contact. If he texts you, save it. If he calls, let it go to voicemail. We are building a record." Record. The word sounded sterile compared to the ache in my chest, but I understood its value. In court, feelings don't carry weight unless they have proof attached. "What happens next?" I asked. "I'm drafting additional filings," Hawthorne said. "The cloud on title is in place, but we need to be proactive. Cornerstone's counsel will likely claim they're good faith purchasers. We'll challenge that. And Gloria, given what you described yesterday, the physical altercation and the damage to your property there may be grounds to document domestic violence, even though he is your adult son." Walter shifted sharply at the phrase domestic violence. My stomach tightened. I didn't want that label in my life. I didn't want to imagine my son categorized that way, but I also couldn't deny the bruise on my shoulder or the dirt that had been in my mouth. "I understand," I said. "Good," Hawthorne replied. "I will call you later today with next steps. Stay with Ellen. Don't return to the property." And Gloria, if Darren shows up again and becomes aggressive, you call the police. Not as revenge, as protection." I hung up. Walter stared at me. "Police?" he murmured, as if saying the word might summon consequences we weren't ready for. Ellen didn't flinch. "You should have called them when he hit her," she said bluntly. Walter's face twisted with guilt. "I was trying to get her out of there." "I know," Ellen said, voice softening just a fraction. "But hear me, Walter. Men like Darren count on the family instinct to protect the family name. That's how they keep control." Walter looked down at his hands, and I could see the war inside him. Love versus reality. I placed my palm on his forearm. "We're not protecting the family name," I said quietly. "We're protecting the truth." Ellen nodded once, satisfied. "Second," she continued, "we stabilize you two. You can't fight a legal battle while living like refugees." She walked down the hallway and came back with a spare house key. She set it on the table in front of me like it was ceremonial. "This is your key," she said. "You'll have your own routine here, your own shelf in my pantry, your own space in my guest room. You eat properly." Walter rests. "You don't let stress starve you." I stared at the key. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. My house key, my real key, still sat on my ring, but it unlocked nothing now. Ellen's key was a small reminder. Not all doors were closed. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Ellen waved a hand. "Save gratitude for later. We have work." She opened a cabinet and pulled out a folder labeled in thick black marker, "Bennett." I blinked. "Ellen, I started it last night," she said briskly. "I assumed you'd need organization. Inside is your timeline, copies of your trust documents you showed me, a list of names you mentioned, and space for every new development." She slid a pen toward me. "Now, we create structure." I sat, pen hovering, and for the first time since Birchwood Lane, I felt like I was back in familiar territory. Not comfort structure, the thing that keeps you upright when emotion tries to liquefy you. Ellen pointed. "Write the key facts again. Clean, no emotion, date, time, location." I did. June 22, 4:15 p.m. Returned from Portugal. Lockbox, real estate sign. Darren present. Jaden's statement. June 22, 4:20 p.m. Darren declares sale. Says we are homeless. Walter strikes Darren. Darren destroys memorial flower bed. Darren strikes Gloria while she shields flowers. Neighbors possibly witness. June 23, 5:05 p.m. Darren confronts Gloria at motel. Threatens access to grandson. Implies consequences. June 24, 10:15 a.m. Darren and Brenda arrive at Ellen's house. Attempt to bargain. Implied threat regarding grandson. Witness present. Walter watched me write, his breathing calmer now, as if order itself lowered his pulse. Ellen leaned against the counter. "Good," she said. "Now we identify leverage." "Leverage," Walter repeated quietly. "Is that what this is now?" "It is," Ellen answered, "whether you like the word or not." I stopped writing and looked up. "What leverage do we have?" Ellen ticked off points with her fingers. 1. He used a power of attorney. 2. The trust exists. 3. He sold to an LLC at a speed and price that suggests opportunism. 4. He used a child as a mouthpiece. 5. He escalated to physical harm. Walter flinched at the last one again. "And 6, Ellen added, looking directly at me. "You are not alone anymore." That line hit me harder than I expected. Because isolation is part of how Darren had operated. He'd waited until we were out of the country. He'd acted while we were absent. He'd expected us to return ashamed and quiet, reluctant to involve anyone, especially not friends. Ellen had just dismantled that assumption. The phone buzzed again. A text from Darren. "Mom, stop this. Call me." I stared at the screen. Walter's eyes flicked to it. Ellen's did too. Ellen said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was command enough. I took a screenshot, saved it, and did not respond. Then another text arrived. "You're making Jaden hate you." My chest tightened sharply, like a hand closing around my ribs. There it was, the blade he knew would cut deepest. Walter's face collapsed. "Gloria," Ellen stepped closer, voice low. "He's manipulating you." "I know," I whispered. But knowing didn't stop it from hurting. Because somewhere, in a house that might not legally be his to occupy for long, Darren was telling my grandson a story about me, a story where I was the enemy, a story where justice looked like cruelty and accountability looked like revenge. And a 12-year-old boy was swallowing it because children trust the voice that feeds them every day. I took a slow breath and wrote the text message in my file, word for word. Not because I wanted to preserve pain, because I wanted to preserve truth. Walter reached for my hand. "Do you think we'll ever fix this?" he asked. I looked at him, then at Ellen, then back at my notebook. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know what I won't do. I won't fix it by surrendering." Ellen nodded once, satisfied again. "That's the spirit," she said. "Now we wait for Hawthorne's next move." I glanced at Darren's last message, glowing on my phone like poison. "You're making Jaden hate you." I set the phone face down. Fear can be loud. Shame can be louder. But action is quieter than both, and it changes the world anyway. I picked up my pen again, because the war Darren started wasn't going to be won with croissants or threats. It was going to be won with documentation, patience, and a refusal to let love be used as a leash. That night, I lay awake in Ellen's guest room listening to the house breathe. The refrigerator hummed. A pipe clicked somewhere in the walls. Walter shifted beside me, careful, always careful, as if sudden movement might wake more than just me. I stared at the ceiling and thought about Jaden. "You're making Jaden hate you." Darren's words didn't fade with time. They settled, they replayed, they tried to root themselves in places already tender. I rolled onto my side and reached for my phone on the nightstand. No new messages. That almost hurt more. Silence from a grandson who used to text me pictures of his science projects. Silence from a boy who used to call me when he needed help with an essay. I closed my eyes and remembered his voice on the porch. "She just cares about the house, not Grandma. She..." As if I were a stranger. Walter's hand found mine in the dark. "You're thinking," he murmured. "Yes." "About him?" "Yes." Walter exhaled slowly. "He's a child, Gloria. He's hearing one side." "I know," I whispered, "but children build their foundations early." Walter squeezed my hand. "Then we show him what foundation looks like." I didn't sleep much after that. Morning came gray and quiet, a thin layer of clouds muting the sun. Ellen was already dressed when I walked into the kitchen, her reading glasses perched low on her nose as she scanned the local paper. She glanced up. "You look like you argued with ghosts all night." "I did," I said. She folded the paper neatly. "Then let's give the ghosts something real to chew on." I poured coffee and sat across from her. "Cornerstone's lawyer called Hawthorne," she said matter-of-factly. I blinked. "You spoke to him?" "No," she replied calmly. "But I called Richard at 7. I wanted an update before Darren decides to escalate again." I almost smiled. Ellen ran her mornings like a command center. "What did he say?" I asked. Ellen leaned back. "Cornerstone is uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable how?" "They're claiming good faith," she said. "They're saying they relied on public records and a properly executed power of attorney. But Richard is pressing the issue of the trust and Darren's prior knowledge of its existence." I nodded slowly. "Here's where it gets interesting," Ellen continued. "Cornerstone purchased your home for nearly $70,000 below market value. Walter entered the kitchen just in time to hear that. 70? "Yes," Ellen said crisply, "which suggests they knew something was off." I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear. It was strategic recognition. "Distressed property," I murmured. Ellen nodded. "Exactly." Walter sat down heavily. "So, what does that mean?" "It means," Ellen said, "they may not want this dragged through open court either. Because companies that move fast don't like bright lights." My phone buzzed. This time, it wasn't Darren. It was Jaden. My breath caught so sharply that Walter noticed immediately. "Is it him?" he asked. I nodded. The message was short. "Dad says you're trying to take everything from us." The words blurred for a second before I blinked them back into focus. There it was, the narrative Darren had been building. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of a choice. Do I defend myself? Do I explain? Do I argue? Ellen watched me carefully. "What did he say?" I handed her the phone. She read it and looked up slowly. "That's Darren's voice." "Yes," I whispered. Walter leaned forward. Answer him. But how? How do you counter a lie without sounding defensive? How do you tell a 12-year-old that his father committed a crime without making him feel like he has to choose sides? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, I love you. I am not taking anything from you. I am protecting what Grandpa and I built. When you're ready, I will tell you everything honestly. I stared at it. No accusations. No legal language. Just truth. Walter read it over my shoulder. Send it. I pressed send. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then vanished. No reply. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to set the phone down. You did the right thing, Ellen said quietly. I hope so, I answered. Ellen folded her hands. Gloria, this is where Darren miscalculated. I looked at her. He thinks shame will make you back down, she said. He thinks public exposure will scare you. He thinks your grandson's affection is leverage. Walter nodded grimly. He knows her soft spots. Yes, Ellen said, but what he doesn't understand is that you are not fighting for pride. You're fighting for principle. Principle. The word sounded almost old-fashioned in a world that valued speed and profit, but it was still solid. Later that afternoon, Richard Hawthorne called again. I've scheduled a preliminary hearing for declaratory judgment, he said. 3 weeks from now. My pulse jumped. That fast? Yes, he replied. We're moving aggressively. Walter's eyebrows rose. Hawthorne continued, Cornerstone is weighing their exposure. If the court determines the trust held equitable title, the sale becomes voidable. That places the burden squarely back on Darren. Walter swallowed. What happens to him? That depends, Hawthorne said evenly. If there's evidence of knowing misrepresentation, there could be referral for elder financial abuse. The phrase hung in the air again. Elder financial abuse. It sounded clinical. It sounded cold. It sounded exactly like what had happened. I closed my eyes briefly. My son, I said quietly. I understand, Hawthorne replied, but this is not about labels. It's about facts. Facts. The facts were simple. He sold our home. He laughed. He struck me. He tried to silence us. I opened my eyes. We proceed, I said. After the call ended, Walter looked at me carefully. Are you sure? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I thought of my flower bed, the memorial hydrangeas I planted the year my mother passed, the small stone plaque with her name, the soil I turned every spring with my own hands. Darren hadn't just sold property. He had stomped on memory. He had treated 42 years like inventory. I met Walter's gaze. Yes, I said, I'm sure. That evening, Ellen poured 3 glasses of wine. We sat on her screened porch, the air cooling slightly as the sun dropped behind the trees. Crickets began their steady chorus. Walter leaned back, tired but calmer. Ellen sipped her wine and looked at me thoughtfully. You know what the hardest part is? She said. What? I asked. Not the legal battle, she replied. Not the public record. The hardest part is accepting that the person who hurt you might not recognize what they've done. I nodded slowly. Because Darren didn't look remorseful. He looked inconvenienced. And that difference mattered. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Jaden. I don't want you and Dad fighting. My eyes filled before I could stop them. I typed back carefully. Neither do I. Sometimes adults have to fix serious mistakes. That doesn't mean we stop loving each other. I waited. No response. But at least the line wasn't cut. Walter reached for my hand. He'll understand someday, he said. Yes, I replied softly. He will, because children grow. And when they do, they look back. And when they look back, they see who stood steady and who folded. The crickets grew louder. The porch light flicked on automatically. And for the first time since returning from Portugal, I felt something close to strength, not loud, not triumphant, just steady. Darren believed he could force silence. But silence was no longer his ally. We had documentation. We had witnesses. We had legal motion in place. And most importantly, we had not surrendered our dignity to protect his pride. The war wasn't public yet, but it was coming. And when it did, I would not be the woman he expected. By Friday morning, Maplewood had started to do what small towns do best. It noticed. Ellen drove me to pick up a few essentials from the pharmacy and the grocery store, things I hadn't thought to pack when we fled Birchwood Lane like strangers. Toothpaste, Walter's low-sodium crackers. A new bottle of the lotion I keep by the sink because my hands, after decades of chalk dust and library books, still dry out faster than they should. We pulled into the parking lot at Maplewood Market, and before I even stepped out of the car, I felt it. The quiet shift. 2 women by the cart returned paused mid-conversation. A man loading cases of soda into his trunk glanced toward me and then looked away too quickly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hostile. It was curiosity wrapped in politeness. Ellen saw it too. "Heads up," she murmured, as if we were walking into a parent-teacher conference with a difficult family. Inside, the grocery store smelled like citrus cleaner and baked bread. The Friday morning crowd was mostly retirees, people like me. People who moved slower, who took time reading labels, who still greeted each other by name in the produce aisle. A familiar voice called out almost immediately, "Gloria?" I turned and saw Carol Jensen, one of my old colleagues from Maplewood Middle. She'd taught social studies for 30 years and retired the same year I did. Her hair was still perfectly set, and she had that bright, practiced smile that teachers develop, the one that says, "I see you, and I'm safe." But her eyes were worried. "Carol," I said, forcing a calm I didn't fully feel. She took a step closer, lowering her voice automatically. "Honey, I heard you and Walter got back." "Yes," I replied. Carol's gaze flicked to Ellen, then back to me. "Are you all right?" Ellen stepped slightly to my side, not crowding me but anchoring me, like a bodyguard with manners. "We're managing," I said. Carol's lips pressed together. I can't believe Darren would do something like that. So it was already out. I felt my stomach tighten. "Who told you?" Carol sighed. "People talk. The Hendersons saw the sign, someone saw the lockbox, and you know how it goes. One person says something, then suddenly everyone has a version. A version. That was the danger. Darren wasn't just fighting us legally. He was fighting for the story. He wanted Maplewood to see him as a stressed son trying to fix a problem, and us as stubborn elderly parents making it harder. Carol touched my arm gently. "Gloria, I'm so sorry." I nodded once. "Thank you." She hesitated. "Is it true you hit him?" I blinked. "What?" Carol's cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean someone said Walter," swung at him. So that version was spreading too. Walter's single act of rage born from Darren's cruelty was already being reshaped into something else. I chose my words carefully. "Walter struck him after Darren laughed and told us we were homeless," I said quietly. "After Darren sold our house without our knowledge." Carol's eyes widened, and for a moment the gossip fell away, and the truth stood naked. "Oh my God," she whispered. Ellen's voice cut in, calm and firm. "Carol, we're not discussing details in the produce aisle." Carol nodded quickly. Of course. She lowered her voice again. "If you need anything, meals, rides, anything, please call me." I thanked her, and we moved on. But my hands shook slightly as I picked up a bunch of bananas. Not because I was afraid of Carol, because I could feel the town's eyes on me without anyone looking directly. This is what Darren had threatened. Public discomfort, public scrutiny, the quiet humiliation of being a story people consumed while choosing tomatoes. Ellen leaned toward me. "Do not let them pull you into explaining," she murmured. "Explanation invites debate." "I know," I whispered. "But it's hard." "I know," Ellen said. "That's why I'm here." At the pharmacy, it was worse. The pharmacist, Mr. Patel, had filled Walter's prescriptions for years. He greeted us warmly, but the young technician at the counter, early 20s, ponytail, bright nails, stared just a second too long. When she handed me the bag, she said, too casually, "So, are you moving?" The question was harmless in tone, but it landed like a jab. I held her gaze. "We're in a legal dispute," I said, calm and clear. "That's all." Her cheeks reddened. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "It's fine," I said, and walked away. Outside, Walter was sitting in the car, waiting. Ellen had got me at the door and parked. Walter looked up as I approached, his face tight. "People are staring," he said quietly. "Yes," I answered. He swallowed. "I hate this." "So do I," said. I slid into the passenger seat and took his hand. His palm was cool. "They're going to talk," he murmured. "They'll say we should have handled it privately. They'll say a lot." Ellen replied as she got into the driver's seat, but they weren't the ones whose house got sold. On the drive back, we passed Birchwood Lane. I hadn't asked to. Ellen didn't mention it. The road simply curved that way, and the house appeared like a photograph you didn't want to see, but couldn't avoid. The real estate sign was still there. The lockbox was still on the door. And my memorial flower bed, my hydrangeas, looked like a wound from the street. Even from a distance, I could see bare patches of soil where the plants had been crushed. My throat tightened. Walter's hand squeezed mine. Ellen kept her eyes forward. "Don't go in," she said softly, as if reading my mind. "Not yet." "I know," I whispered. But grief doesn't listen to strategy. Grief rises when it wants. Back at Ellen's house, I tried to settle into routine. Routine is what keeps older adults sane. Coffee at the same time, news at noon, a walk after dinner, a life with edges. But my phone kept buzzing. Not Darren directly. Friends, neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in years. "Are you okay? Heard something happened with the house. Do you need a place to stay? Is it true Darren sold it? My cousin says you're suing your own son." That last one made my stomach turn. Ellen sat at her kitchen table with my notebook open, flipping pages like she was grading essays. "Don't answer any of those," she said. "Unless it's someone you trust absolutely. And even then, keep it simple." Walter looked weary. "We're going to look guilty if we don't say anything." Ellen's gaze snapped to him. "Walter, innocence doesn't require performance." I exhaled slowly. She's right. The phone buzzed again. A new message. From Brenda. "Gloria, please. People are talking. This is humiliating for the kids. Can we meet and settle this quietly?" Humiliating for the kids. Not for us. Not for my mother's crushed hydrangeas. Not for Walter sitting in a motel 2 nights in a row trying to keep his heart steady. The kids. Always the kids. I showed Ellen and Walter. Walter's face softened in that way it always did when grandchildren were mentioned. Ellen didn't soften at all. "They're using the children to make you feel guilty," she said. "Guilt is cheaper than restitution." Walter rubbed his forehead. "But Gloria, Jaden, Kyle, the little ones, they didn't do this." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why this hurts. Because Darren wasn't just threatening legal consequences. He was threatening my place in the family story. He wanted the children to associate me with conflict, not love. And in a small town, conflict sticks. That afternoon, Ellen's phone rang. She put it on speaker without asking, because Ellen believes in transparency. "Marshall," she said. A man's voice responded, formal, careful. "Mrs. Marshall, this is attorney David Klein. I represent Cornerstone Equity Solutions, LLC. I'm calling regarding the notice of dispute filed on 417 Birchwood Lane." Ellen's eyes flicked to me. She didn't speak for me. She gave me the floor. I picked up the phone from her hand and held it close, steadying my voice. "This is Gloria Bennett. Our attorney is Richard Hawthorne. You should speak to him." A pause. "Mrs. Bennett, we have spoken to Mr. Hawthorne. Cornerstone purchased the property in good faith. We relied on recorded deed records and a valid power of attorney." "We did not authorize the sale," I said. "Understood," Klein replied. "But Cornerstone is now in possession and is incurring expenses. We are attempting to resolve this efficiently." Efficiently. That word had Darren's fingerprints all over it. "I'm not discussing resolution without my attorney," I repeated. Klein exhaled lightly. "Very well. Please understand, Mrs. Bennett, that this dispute will become public record." "I understand," I said, and then I added, because I wanted him to hear it in a voice that wasn't afraid. "Some things deserve sunlight." The line hung for a second. Then he said, "We will continue through counsel," and the call ended. Ellen let out a low whistle. "Well," she said, "that's the first time they've felt the heat." Walter looked unsettled. "Public record," he murmured. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The truth was, I had spent years living quietly, valuing privacy, keeping family problems inside family walls. That was the culture of our generation. You don't air your dirty laundry. You handle things behind closed doors. You protect the family name. But Darren had used that belief like a weapon. He had counted on it to keep me silent. And now Maplewood was watching. I could either shrink under their gaze and let Darren narrate my life, Or I could stand upright and let the law narrate the facts. That night, Ellen made a pot roast and insisted we eat at the table like a proper family. Walter said grace quietly, voice shaking only slightly. After dinner, I stepped onto Ellen's porch alone, the air warm and thick with summer. Across the street, a neighbor's porch light flicked on. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere a lawnmower hummed late into the evening. Someone refusing to slow down just because the day was ending. I checked my phone one last time. No message from Jaden. But the earlier one sat there like a thread I couldn't cut. Dad says you're trying to take everything from us. I typed a new message and stared at it before sending. I'm not taking. I'm protecting. One day you'll understand the difference. I sent it. Then I sat back and listened to the sounds of the neighborhood of a town that would keep whispering until the truth arrived loud enough to silence rumor. And it would arrive. Not in the form of my explanations. In the form of court papers, hearings, and a judge who didn't care about Darren's charm or Maplewood's gossip. Justice doesn't always feel fair on the way in. But it has a way of showing up with receipts. The first time Walter's heart betrayed him, it did it quietly. There was no dramatic collapse. No ambulance lights streaking down Birchwood Lane. It was a Tuesday morning 4 years ago. He stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing strawberries, and I noticed his hand had stopped moving. He didn't drop the berries. He didn't clutch his chest. He just leaned slightly, as if the room had tilted, and he needed the counter to remind him which way was up. "Walter," I said. He looked at me and tried to smile. "I'm fine." That's what he said every time something was not fine. Now, sitting at Ellen's kitchen table with the town whispering and legal papers stacking up like storm clouds, I could see that same quiet strain creeping back into him. Not because his arteries knew anything about Darren or Cornerstone, but because Walter's body had always reacted to stress as if stress were a physical threat. And in a way, it was. Saturday morning, Ellen insisted we take a walk. "Movement," she said, "is medicine." She said it like a principal issuing an order about attendance. Walter put on his sneakers slowly, tying the laces with more care than usual. I watched his hands. I watched the faint tremor in his fingers. "You all right?" I asked. He nodded too quickly. "Just stiff." We walked down Ellen's street under a bright sky that felt almost offensive in its cheerfulness. Maplewood looked like Maplewood always did, flags on porches, sprinklers clicking, people mowing lawns as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. 2 blocks in, Walter slowed. Not dramatically. Not enough for a passerby to notice. But I noticed, because I've noticed him for 40 years. "You need a break?" I asked. "I'm fine," he said again. Ellen, walking on his other side, didn't accept it. "Walter," she said, "stop lying to the people who love you." He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "I'm not lying," he muttered. "I'm managing." We reached a bench near a small park where teenagers played basketball and older couples walked small dogs. Walter sat, shoulders rising and falling a little too fast. I sat beside him and placed my hand on his knee. Ellen stood in front of us, arms crossed, eyes scanning Walter's face like she was assessing a student for signs of distress. "Chest pain?" she asked. Walter shook his head. "No, just pressure." "What kind of pressure?" I asked gently. He hesitated, then admitted what I already knew. The kind that comes from watching your family fall apart and not being able to fix it. My throat tightened. Ellen's voice softened slightly, but only slightly. "Then you need to stop letting Darren use your heart as a leash." Walter blinked. "He's not." "He is," Ellen cut in. "Every time you consider backing down, you say my heart. Every time he threatens you, he says your heart. That's not love. That's leverage." Walter stared at his hands. I thought about Darren standing in the motel hallway, saying, "Don't expect to see Jaden." About him leaning forward at Ellen's table, asking if I wanted Walter's heart in the middle of a lawsuit. About Brenda's message saying humiliating for the kids. About Darren's text, "You're making Jaden hate you." Every sentence had the same structure. "Don't push back, or you'll lose what you love." That's not family. That's extortion with a familiar face. "Walter," I said quietly, "your heart condition is real, but it doesn't mean you have to surrender." He looked up at me, eyes shiny. "I don't want you to suffer because of me." I swallowed hard. "I'm suffering because of Darren," I said. "Not because of you." Ellen nodded. "Exactly," Walter sat back, breathing slower now. The teenager's basketball thudded rhythmically. A dog barked once, sharp and impatient. A woman waved at Ellen from across the street, then pretended not to look too closely at Walter's posture. Small-town courtesy. "Let's go home," I said after a few minutes. "We'll call Dr. Reynolds and get you checked, just to be safe." Walter started to protest, then stopped. "Okay," he said quietly. At home, Ellen's home, Walter lay down in the guest room. Ellen insisted on taking his blood pressure herself because Ellen always had a blood pressure cuff in a drawer the way some people keep extra candles. She frowned at the numbers, not panicking but not pleased. "Higher than I like," she muttered. "Gloria, call his cardiologist." I did. Dr. Reynolds' office offered an appointment Monday morning. Walter tried to refuse it. I ignored him. "You're not dying on principle," I told him. "You're living on it." He gave me a tired, reluctant smile. That afternoon, while Walter slept, I sat at Ellen's kitchen table and tried to do something I hadn't allowed myself to do yet. Imagine losing. Not losing the house. Losing Walter. The thought hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the chair. This was Darren's most effective weapon, and he knew it. He knew Walter was the soft spot in my armor. He knew I would take pain myself more easily than I would watch Walter suffer. I could feel the temptation to compromise rising in me like a tide. 12 months of rent, Brenda had offered. A private settlement. No court, no public record, no stress. And then I saw Darren's boot coming down on my hydrangeas. I saw the way he struck me when I tried to protect something sacred. I heard Jaden's voice repeating Darren's contempt. If I accepted a deal now, what would that teach? That violence works. That intimidation is rewarded. That the person with the loudest threat gets to rewrite the rules. I couldn't do that. Not even to protect myself from fear. Not even to protect Walter from stress. Because if we surrendered under pressure, Darren would learn he could pressure us again, and again, and again. The phone rang late afternoon. Mr. Hawthorne. "Gloria," he said, "I want to prepare you for something." My stomach tightened. "What?" "Cornerstone's counsel is exploring options," he said. "They may attempt to pressure you into withdrawing the notice. They may say they'll sue you for damages." "Can they?" I asked. "They can file anything," he replied calmly. "The question is whether they can win. The notice was filed in good faith based on a legitimate dispute. Don't let their bluster scare you." I exhaled slowly. "Darren uses bluster too." "That's rarely a coincidence," Hawthorne said. "Also, I want you to start thinking about the incident at the house. The physical harm, the property damage. We may need that documented officially." My shoulder ached as if remembering. "I don't want to turn this into that," I admitted. Hawthorne's voice stayed gentle but firm. "Gloria, you don't get to choose the category once someone else commits the act. You only get to choose whether you protect yourself. If he is willing to strike you once, he may be willing again, especially as pressure increases." I swallowed. "Okay," I said. After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. Ellen came in quietly and set a bowl of sliced apples on the table like I was a student who'd forgotten lunch. "How's Walter?" she asked. "Sleeping," I said. "His pressure's up." Ellen nodded, unsurprised. "This is what Darren wants," she said softly. "He wants you to associate resistance with Walter's pain." I stared at the apples. Ellen continued, voice low and steady. "You can care for Walter without giving Darren the win." "How?" I asked. "By doing both," she said simply. "You manage Walter's health medically, and you manage Darren legally. You don't mix them. You don't let Darren turn your husband into a hostage." Her words hit me like a line I would underline in a book. Hostage. That's what it felt like. Walter woke around dinner, looking embarrassed for needing rest. "I'm okay," he insisted. "Good," Ellen said briskly. "Then you can eat the meatloaf I made and stop arguing." Walter chuckled quietly, and it was the first time in days I'd heard genuine amusement in him. At the table, he ate slowly, then looked at me with a seriousness that made my fork pause halfway to my mouth. "Gloria," he said, "I need you to promise something." I felt my chest tighten again. Promises had become dangerous lately. "What?" I asked. "If my heart gets worse," he said carefully, "you don't stop." Ellen went still. I stared at him. "Walter." "No," he said, voice stronger than it had been all week. Listen to me. Darren can't keep using me to control you. If I end up in a hospital bed and Darren tells you to drop the case, you don't." Tears stung my eyes, hot and immediate. "Don't ask me that," I whispered. "I'm not asking," he said. "I'm telling you what a husband is supposed to do. I'm telling you I won't be the reason you surrender your dignity." Ellen cleared her throat softly, not to interrupt but to keep herself from crying, I realized. Ellen didn't cry easily, but she wasn't stone. Walter reached across the table and took my hand. "Promise," he said. I squeezed his fingers, feeling the pulse beneath his skin, steady for now. "I promise," I whispered. After dinner, I went into the bathroom and stared at my reflection. I looked like the same woman I'd been in Portugal 10 days ago, but my eyes held something different now. A kind of adult clarity that comes late in life, when you realize love isn't just softness. Love is also boundaries. Love is also consequences. And love is refusing to let harm become tradition. I returned to the kitchen and opened my notebook. I added a new page. Walter's health plan. Cardiologist Monday 9 a.m. Medication check. Blood pressure monitoring daily. Walks. Short, consistent. Stress management. No contact with Darren. Then, beneath it, I wrote another heading. Legal war plan. No direct communication. Document all threats. Prepare affidavit re physical assault and property damage. Prepare for hearing. 2 columns, 2 worlds. And I would not let Darren merge them. Because Darren wanted me desperate enough to accept any deal. But desperation makes people sign bad papers. I had learned that lesson as a teacher and as a mother. Now I would apply it as a woman who refused to be made homeless by her own child. Monday morning, Walter's cardiologist told us what I already knew but needed to hear in a doctor's calm voice. Stress was not a metaphor in his body. It was chemistry. It was numbers. It was pressure that rose and refused to come down just because we wanted it to. Dr. Reynolds adjusted his glasses and looked from Walter to me. "You've had a rough week," he said. Walter gave a half smile. "That's one way to put it." Dr. Reynolds didn't press for details, and I was grateful. Older doctors understand that people our age carry private storms. They ask what they must, not what they're curious about. He checked Walter's vitals, reviewed medications, asked about sleep and appetite, and then leaned back in his chair. "I want you to take it slower," he told Walter, "and I want you to be consistent. Light walking, no sudden exertion. And if you feel chest tightness or shortness of breath that doesn't resolve with rest, you call me. You don't wait." Walter nodded, obedient in the way proud men become when they can't afford pride. Dr. Reynolds' eyes shifted to me. "And you," he said gently, "make sure he eats, make sure he rests, and keep conflict away from him if you can." Conflict. If only it were that simple. In the car afterward, Walter stared out the window as Maplewood slid past. Brick storefronts, the courthouse dome in the distance, the diner that still served the same meatloaf special on Tuesdays. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. I looked at him. "For what?" "For being a factor," he said, voice quiet. "For being fragile." My heart tightened. "Walter," I said, "you are not fragile. You're alive, and we're going to keep you that way." He nodded but didn't look convinced. When we got back to Ellen's house, Mr. Hawthorne called. "Gloria," he said, "I've filed for a declaratory judgment hearing. We're on the docket. Room 4, Maplewood County Courthouse." The courthouse. Just hearing the words made my stomach tighten with that familiar mix of dread and determination. Courts are where ordinary people bring extraordinary pain and ask strangers in robes to translate it into law. "When?" I asked. "Thursday next week," Hawthorne replied. I pushed for speed. Cornerstone wanted time. Darren wanted time. Time favors the party trying to bury the trail. I swallowed. "And what do you need from us?" "2 things," he said. "First, you'll sign a supplemental affidavit about the incident on the porch, the physical contact, and the property damage. Second, I want you to prepare yourself emotionally. Darren's attorney will try to paint you as unreasonable." Unreasonable. The word made me almost laugh. A mother defending her home is always labeled unreasonable by the person who stole it. Walter entered the kitchen while I was on the phone, his face pale but composed. Ellen watched him from the counter, eyes sharp. When I hung up, Ellen asked, We going to court? Yes, I said. Thursday. Walter sat down slowly. I want to be there. I had expected that, and I feared it. Walter, I began. He held up a hand. Gloria, I'm not going to be used as a reason to back down. I want the judge to see us. Not as a story Darren tells. As people. Ellen nodded once, approving. He should be there, she said. The court needs to see the human cost. I stared at my husband, wanting to protect him, wanting to wrap him in quiet and keep him away from fluorescent lights and legal language. But Walter was right. Presence matters. Witness matters. All right, I said softly. But we do it carefully. The days leading to Thursday were a strange kind of waiting. Not the relaxed waiting of anticipation, more like the waiting you do before a storm makes landfall. Everything looks normal, but you feel the pressure shift. You prepare supplies. You secure what can be secured. You remind yourself to breathe. Ellen treated those days like preparation for a major presentation. She made lists. She timed our departures. She insisted we try on clothing. Court is theater, she said bluntly. Not in truth, in perception. I chose a simple navy blazer and a cream blouse. Walter wore a gray sport coat. Conservative, respectable, the kind of clothing that signals we are not here to perform outrage. We are here to be taken seriously. Thursday arrived hot and bright. The Maplewood County Courthouse looked exactly like it had when I was young. Red brick, white columns, a flag out front snapping in the breeze. The parking lot was already half full. A few people smoked near the entrance, jackets draped over their arms. Inside, the air smelled like paper, old wood, and metal. Security made us empty our pockets. The guard was polite but tired. He had probably seen every kind of family break itself in half under these ceilings. We found room 4. Fluorescent lights. Wooden benches polished by decades of nervous hands. A small seal on the wall behind the judge's bench. Not grand, not dramatic. The kind of room where life changes without music swelling in the background. Mr. Hawthorne met us outside the door, folder in hand. Walter, he said, shaking my husband's hand. Gloria. His gaze flicked briefly to my shoulder as if checking that the bruise was fading. He lowered his voice. Darren retained Douglas Pryor. I knew the name. Ellen had warned me about him, an attorney known for creative arguments, the kind that look for loopholes and technicalities and then sell them as morality. Pryor stood across the hallway with Darren. Seeing my son in a courthouse hit me like a physical impact. Darren wore a tie, which was unusual for him. He looked clean, polished, prepared. He wanted to look like the responsible one, like the adult, like the victim of his parents' overreaction. Brenda sat 2 seats behind him, lips tight, eyes scanning the hallway as if tracking who might be watching. I didn't see Jaden. I was relieved and heartsick at the same time. Darren looked at us and smiled faintly, an echo of the porch smile, stripped of laughter now, replaced with controlled confidence. Walter's hand tightened around mine. Breathe, I whispered. I am, he said, but his voice shook slightly. We entered the courtroom and took our seats at the table, Hawthorne indicated. Across from us, Darren sat with Prier, posture confident, hands neatly folded. Prier leaned close, murmuring something into Darren's ear that made Darren nod like a student being coached. The bailiff called the case. Everyone rose when the judge entered. Judge Sandra Bellows was in her 50s, hair pulled back, expression efficient. She looked like someone who had spent years hearing claims and sorting them quickly into what mattered and what didn't. She sat, glanced down at the files, and began without ceremony. This is a declaratory judgment proceeding, she said. We are here to determine the rightful ownership status of the property at 417 Birchwood Lane and the validity of the conveyance executed under power of attorney. Her voice was calm. The words were heavy. Hawthorne stood when called and spoke clearly, laying out our position, the existence of the Bennett Family Trust, the documented intent to transfer, the claim that Darren lacked trustee authority, the dispute filed to prevent resale, the issue of equitable title. He did not attack Darren personally. He let the facts do the work. Then Pryor stood. He was smooth in the way men are smooth when they have made a career out of persuasion. He spoke about public records, about reliance, about the deed reflecting individual ownership, about the power of attorney being broad enough to authorize real estate transactions. about Cornerstone as a good faith purchaser. He used phrases like unfortunate misunderstanding and family dispute. I felt heat rise up my neck. Family dispute. A man sells your home and strikes you, and they call it a dispute. I forced myself to remain still. Judge Bellows asked questions, precise and pointed, interrupting both attorneys when they tried to wander. Then her gaze moved to Darren. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "you executed the sale under power of attorney. Did you review any trust documents prior to the sale?" Darren swallowed once, but his voice remained steady. "No, Your Honor. I didn't know there were trust documents. I relied on the deed record." Judge Bellows tilted her head slightly. "You didn't know your parents formed a trust?" "They never told me," Darren said. Walter's hand trembled on the table. I didn't move. I had been a teacher long enough to recognize when a student chose the wrong lie because it sounded simple. Judge Bellows looked down at a paper in front of her. "Counselor Hawthorne," she said, "do you have any documentation regarding notice to the family of trust formation?" Hawthorne's eyes flicked to me just briefly, and I understood. This was the moment we'd been holding for. He lifted a single sheet from his folder. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, and the courtroom, under its fluorescent lights, grew very still. Hawthorne held the paper the way a man holds something that can't be argued with. Not high, not dramatic, just steady, at chest level, as if he were offering it to the court the same way you offer a driver's license to an officer, calm, clear, inevitable. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to submit Exhibit 14. Judge Bellows extended a hand. The bailiff crossed the room, took the sheet from Hawthorne, and placed it on the bench in front of her. I watched my son while the paper traveled. Darren's confidence stayed in place for the first 2 seconds, like a smile that doesn't know yet it's about to disappear. Then his eyes narrowed. He leaned forward slightly, as if trying to see the page from across the room. Douglas Prior placed a hand on Darren's forearm, quiet control, a warning to hold still. Judge Bellows adjusted her glasses and read. The fluorescent lights above her didn't flicker. They buzzed steadily, indifferent to the fact that my family's story was about to be corrected. "This appears to be a sign-in log," the judge said. "Yes, Your Honor," Hawthorne replied. "From a meeting at my office on the 17th of September 2013. The meeting was titled Bennett Family Trust Formation and Asset Transfer." Judge Bellows's eyes lifted. "Mr. Bennett," she said, voice even, "were you present at a meeting regarding the formation of your parents' family trust in 2013? Darren's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I don't recall," he said finally. I heard Walter's breath catch beside me, a quiet sound like a man trying to keep his pulse from climbing. Judge Bellows looked back down at the exhibit. "Your name is on this sheet," she said. Hawthorne spoke softly, but the words carried. "It is his signature, Your Honor. We have it matched to other signatures on file." Prior stood abruptly. "Objection," he said. "Foundation. Authenticity. This is a single piece of paper." Judge Bellows raised a hand without looking up. "Counselor Prior," she said, "you will have an opportunity to address authenticity. For now, I'm asking a factual question." Her gaze returned to Darren. "Mr. Bennett," she repeated, "is that your signature?" Silence stretched. Not long in minutes, but long in meaning. Darren stared at the paper as if it had betrayed him personally. Then he did something small that told me everything. He licked his lips. A nervous gesture, human, uncontrolled, the first crack in the smooth performance. I must have signed in," he said. "That was 12 years ago." Judge Bellows's voice didn't change. "So you were present." "I was there," Darren said quickly now, trying to regain footing. "But I don't remember the details. My parents didn't explain it to me." I watched him lie and felt no surprise, only a deep, clean sadness. This was the same man who had stomped my mother's hydrangeas into the dirt while his son watched. Of course he would stomp truth too, if it stood in his way. Judge Bellows turned to Hawthorne. "Does this meeting log indicate what was discussed?" "It does," Hawthorne said, producing a second document. "We also have the meeting agenda and the standard notification letter mailed to Mr. Bennett's listed address in November 2013, informing the family of the trust's creation." Prior's face tightened. He wasn't panicking, but his smoothness had sharpened into calculation. He was now searching for angles, not confidence. Judge Bellows flipped through the pages, then set them down with deliberate care. "Mr. Bennett," she said to Darren, "you told the court you didn't know there were trust documents. This suggests you were present for the formation of those documents and received notice afterward." Darren's cheeks flushed slightly. He glanced at Pryor. Pryor leaned in, murmured something, and Darren nodded as if being reminded of lines in a script. "Yes, Your Honor," Darren said, "but that doesn't mean I understood what it meant. I relied on public deed records and the power of attorney." Hawthorne's voice stayed calm. "Your Honor, reliance is not the issue if the executing party had knowledge, actual or constructive, of the trust's existence, especially when the power of attorney was drafted in connection with the same estate planning process." Judge Bellows's eyes narrowed slightly. "Counselor Pryor," she said, "explain to me how a man who signed in to a trust formation meeting can credibly claim he had no awareness of the trust's existence when he sold his parents' home." Pryor straightened, the professional mask back in place. "Your Honor, the existence of a trust is not equivalent to the perfection of title. The deed was never re-recorded. The public record shows the Bennetts as individual owners. My client acted under a duly executed power of attorney that granted broad authority. Any failure to update the deed is an administrative oversight, not evidence of wrongdoing." Administrative oversight. That phrase sounded so neat for something that nearly cost us our life's work. Judge Bellows looked down at her notes. "I understand that argument," she said. "I also understand the principle of equitable title." Hawthorne spoke then, and this was where his years of careful practice showed. He didn't argue like a man trying to win a shouting match. He argued like a man laying bricks. "Your Honor," he said, "Ohio courts have recognized that properly executed trust transfers can establish equitable ownership even when the deed recording lags. The intent is documented. The trust exists. The asset schedule lists the property. And here we have evidence that the executing party, Mr. Bennett, was aware of the trust's existence." Walter's hand tightened around mine under the table. I could feel his pulse racing through his fingers. I leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "Breathe." Not as an instruction, as a tether. Judge Bellows looked at Darren again. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "when you executed this sale, did you disclose to Cornerstone or to the title company that your parents had established a trust that listed the home as a trust asset?" Darren's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Pryor stepped forward, voice quick. "Your Honor, my client is not required to disclose unrecorded instruments that do not appear in the chain of title." Judge Bellows held up a hand again. "Counselor, I asked him a question." She waited. The entire courtroom waited. Fluorescent lights, wooden benches, the quiet hum of a public system that doesn't care who you are, only what you can prove. Darren swallowed. "No," he said finally, "I didn't disclose it." Judge Bellows made a small note on her pad. "So you omitted a material fact." "That fact wasn't recorded," Darren said quickly, trying to turn it into technicality. "It wasn't in public records." Judge Bellows's eyes stayed on him. "Yet you were aware it existed." Darren's face tightened. "I was under pressure." Pressure. That was his new costume desperation as excuse. I thought of my shoulder hitting the ground. I thought of my flowers crushed into mud. I thought of him saying we were homeless like it was a joke. Pressure didn't make him laugh. Character did. Judge Bellows leaned back slightly. "All right," she said. "I'm not issuing a ruling today. This matter raises questions that require review of the full record." A murmur moved through the room, then settled. She looked directly at both attorneys. "I will take the filings under advisement. I also want briefing on the issue of good faith, both for the executing party and the purchasing entity, given the discount price and the knowledge presented here." Discount price. My heart lifted and sank at the same time. Relief that she saw it. Fear of what would come next. Then Judge Bellows said something that made Walter's breath stop. "The court notes," she said carefully, "that the facts presented may implicate statutes related to elder financial exploitation. Counsel should be prepared to address that possibility." Elder. Financial. Exploitation. 3 words, spoken calmly, that changed the room's temperature. Darren's face went pale. Pryor's posture stiffened. Brenda, seated behind them, put a hand to her mouth as if to hold something back. Walter's fingers squeezed mine so hard it hurt. I didn't move. Because this was exactly what Darren had counted on never happening. He had counted on us being ashamed. He had counted on us staying quiet. He had counted on the judge seeing this as a family squabble. Instead, under cold, fluorescent lights, the truth was being categorized correctly. And once the law names what was done to you, it becomes much harder for the person who did it to pretend it was love. The bailiff called for everyone to rise. Judge Bellows left. The room began to loosen, people shifting, attorneys gathering papers, benches creaking as strangers stood and exhaled. Walter remained seated for a moment, breathing carefully. I leaned close. "You okay?" He nodded once, eyes wet. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here." Hawthorne packed his folder, expression controlled. "Gloria," he said softly, "this went well." Not finished, but well. Across the aisle, Darren avoided looking at me. He stared straight ahead, as if staring hard enough could erase what had just been placed into evidence. I didn't feel triumph. I felt stillness. The particular stillness of a woman who has waited long enough for the truth to arrive on its own. Outside the courtroom, on the courthouse steps, the heat hit us like a wall. Maplewood's summer air smelled like cut grass and car exhaust, and the faint sweetness from the bakery down the street. Walter took my hand. His palm was damp. We stood there for a long moment without speaking. Sometimes silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's the sound of a story turning. The courthouse steps were hotter than they looked. The stone held the sun the way older people hold memories quietly, but intensely. Walter and I stood there with our shoulders squared, as if posture alone could keep our insides from trembling. Below us, Maplewood moved along like it always did. Cars rolled past. A woman pushed a stroller across the street. Someone laughed near the fountain as if the world had not just split my family into legal categories. Walter's hand stayed in mine. "You did good," he said, voice low, almost embarrassed by the praise. I didn't answer right away because praise didn't fit what I felt. What I felt wasn't pride, it was relief tempered by grief. The kind of grief that comes when the truth finally shows itself in public and you realize you can't pull it back into private anymore. Hawthorne stepped out behind us and adjusted his tie. His face was neutral, but his eyes held the smallest spark of satisfaction, the lawyer's version of gratitude, when a document lands exactly where it should. "She didn't rule today," Walter said, still staring out at the street. "That's normal," Hawthorne replied. "Judges don't like to be rushed on record issues, but her questions were encouraging. Encouraging. A careful word for something that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the wind change. "What happens now?" I asked. Hawthorne opened his folder again, scanning a page as if looking for the exact language that would keep panic from entering my bones. "Now we wait," he said, "and we prepare." I almost smiled, because waiting and preparing were two things I had done my entire career. Teaching is mostly waiting for children to show you who they are and preparing them for the consequences of being that person. Waiting, however, has a cost. Darren was not going to wait quietly. "Cornerstone can't sell the house," Walter said, half statement, half question. "The cloud complicates any resale," Hawthorne confirmed. "But Cornerstone still technically has possession unless we obtain a court order. The ruling will likely address the validity of the conveyance. Until then, they may try to pressure you into withdrawing the notice." "They already started," I said, thinking of Ellen's phone call. The attorney's careful tone, the word efficiently spoken like a blade. Hawthorne nodded. "And Darren will try too, especially now." Walter's jaw tightened, now that he got caught. Hawthorne didn't argue. He simply said, "Now that the record contains evidence inconsistent with his story." We walked down the steps slowly. Walter's pace was careful. I could feel how hard he was working to keep his heart steady, how much energy it took for him just to appear normal. In the parking lot, Hawthorne stopped beside our car. "I want you to do 3 things," he said. 1. Continue documenting all contact. 2. Do not go near Birchwood Lane. 3. If you feel threatened, you call law enforcement. Walter flinched at the last phrase. Hawthorne softened slightly. "I'm not telling you to create drama. I'm telling you to protect yourselves." I nodded. "Understood." He looked at me directly. "Gloria, you were very composed in there." "I've been in rooms full of children trying to get away with lies," I said. "Court isn't so different." Hawthorne's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "No," he agreed, "it isn't." He left us then, walking toward his car with the calm gait of a man who believed in paperwork more than prayer. Walter slid into the passenger seat with a slow exhale. I started the engine. As we drove out of the courthouse lot, my phone buzzed. A text. From Darren. "We need to talk." I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. Ellen's voice echoed in my head. "Explanation invites debate." I didn't answer. 2 seconds later, another text. "You embarrassed me in there." I almost laughed, and the sound came out as a short breath instead. Embarrassed. Not sorry. Not ashamed. Embarrassed. Walter glanced at my phone when it lit again. "Don't," he murmured. "I'm not," I said, but my chest burned anyway. The third text arrived as we stopped at a red light. "You don't know what you've started. Cornerstone is coming after me. If you don't drop this, it's going to ruin everyone. Ruin everyone." The language of a man who sets a fire and blames the smoke. I took a screenshot, saved it, and set the phone face down. Walter stared out the window. "He's scared," he said, repeating what I'd said days ago. "Yes," I replied, "but fear doesn't make him honest." The light changed. I drove. We didn't go back to Ellen's immediately. Walter asked me to pull into the park near the courthouse, the one with the old gazebo and the wide paved paths where retirees walked in the early mornings. "I need air," he said. We sat on a bench beneath a maple tree. Walter breathed slowly, shoulders rising and falling under his jacket. I watched his face, the slight pallor that came when his body was working too hard to stay calm. "Are you okay?" I asked. He nodded. "Just processing." I sat beside him, our knees nearly touching, and let the silence do what it needed to do. Finally, Walter spoke. "Seeing him in that tie," he said quietly, like he was the responsible one, "it made me angry." "Because it was a costume," I said. Walter's eyes stayed on the path. "And because Jaden isn't there to see the truth." That sentence cut. "Yes," I whispered. "Because the courtroom truth was adult truth, legal truth. It lived in exhibits and filings and transcripts. Jaden's truth lived in whatever Darren said at the dinner table, whatever Brenda allowed, whatever tone colored his days. A boy doesn't read court records. A boy reads the face of the parent who tucks him in." The thought made my throat tighten again. Walter leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. "Do you think he'll forgive us?" he asked. "Jaden?" I asked. Walter nodded. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know he'll grow up, and when he does, he'll look back." Walter opened his eyes. "And what will he see?" I stared at the path, at the couples walking hand in hand, at the old men in baseball caps, at the mothers pushing strollers, ordinary life continuing. "He'll see," I said slowly, "who told the truth and who demanded silence." Walter's hand found mine on the bench. He squeezed once. We sat there until his breathing steadied. Back in the car, my phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize. Ellen's voice in my memory. "Don't pick up unknown numbers." I let it ring. Voicemail. I listened once we were parked in Ellen's driveway. A man's voice. Formal. "Mrs. Bennett, this is Attorney David Klein with Cornerstone Equity Solutions. Please return my call. We'd like to discuss a practical resolution." Practical resolution. A phrase that meant, "Withdraw your notice. Let us out clean." Walter saw my face. "Cornerstone?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "They want to talk." Ellen opened her front door before we even reached the porch. She read the tension in our shoulders the way she used to read hallways full of trouble. "Well?" she asked. "No ruling yet," I said. But the judge saw the signature. She mentioned elder exploitation. Ellen's eyes hardened. "Good." Walter exhaled. "Darren's texting." Ellen's gaze snapped to me. "Save everything." "I am," I said. We went into her kitchen, and the room felt like headquarters again. The folder labeled Bennett sat on the table where we'd left it, ready for new facts. I wrote down the courtroom timeline, the judge's key phrases, Darren's texts, the voicemail from Cornerstone's lawyer. Ellen watched me, then asked quietly, "How do you feel?" I stopped writing. How did I feel? I felt like the worst part was over, and also just beginning. Like we'd opened a door we couldn't close. Like the law had finally listened, but now it would take its time speaking back. "I feel suspended," I said. Like we're waiting for the ground to decide whether it's going to hold us. Ellen nodded once. That's accurate. Walter sat down carefully. I hate waiting, he said. So do I admitted. Ellen leaned against the counter. Waiting is where people fold, she said. That's why Darren will press harder now. He'll try to make the waiting unbearable. My phone buzzed one more time. A message from Jaden. Dad said you made him look like a bad person. I stared at the screen until the words stopped blurring. Ellen came behind me and read over my shoulder. Walter leaned in too, and I felt them both watching my reaction like they could stop my heart from breaking by sheer proximity. I typed slowly. I didn't make him look like anything. The truth did. I love you. I'm here when you're ready to talk. I sent it, and then I sat very still, hands flat on the table, because there was nothing else to do but wait and keep my spine straight while the world tried to bend it. That night, after Walter went to bed, Ellen poured 2 cups of tea and sat with me at the kitchen table. They're going to keep calling, she said. Cornerstone, Darren, Brenda, maybe people from church, maybe the paper. Everyone will want a statement. I looked into my tea. And I'm not giving them one. Ellen nodded. Exactly. Let your attorney speak. I exhaled slowly. I'm tired. I know, Ellen said. I thought of the courthouse, the fluorescent lights, Darren's pale face when his signature appeared like an unwanted mirror. I thought of my crushed hydrangeas, my bruised shoulder, my grandson's divided heart. And I realized something simple. Waiting wasn't passive. Waiting was the discipline of not reaching for relief if the price of relief was surrender. I lifted my cup and took a sip. The tea was too hot. So was my life. But I held it anyway. The ruling didn't come like thunder. It came the way most life-changing things come in America, through a phone call in the middle of an ordinary morning when you're standing in someone else's kitchen pretending your life still has a normal shape. It was a Wednesday. Ellen had just finished wiping down the counters, and Walter was outside on the back patio, tying a tomato plant to a stake the way he always did when his hands needed something gentle to do. I was at the kitchen table with my folder open, rereading the same lines from Hawthorne's filings because waiting makes you circle your fear like a porch light attracts moths. My phone rang. Richard Hawthorne. I answered on the first ring. Hawthorne. It's Gloria, he corrected automatically, and there was something in his tone that made my spine straighten. Yes, I said softly. Tell me. He didn't waste time on build-up. Lawyers rarely do when the news is heavy enough to bend a room. Judge Bellows issued her ruling, he said. I have it in front of me. My mouth went dry. Ellen appeared in the doorway as if she could hear tension through walls. She didn't speak. She just leaned against the frame and watched me. Walter was still outside. I could see him through the window, hands moving slowly, shoulders relaxed in a way that didn't match the moment about to land. Okay, I whispered. Go on. Hawthorne's voice was calm, but underneath it I heard satisfaction, the kind that comes when the law does what it is supposed to do. The court finds, he read, that the Bennett Family Revocable Living Trust was validly formed in 2013. I closed my eyes for a second, not to dramatize, but because the sentence felt like a door unlatching. Ellen's hand moved to her mouth. She still didn't speak. Hawthorne continued. The court further finds that the intent to transfer the property at 417 Birchwood Lane into the trust was sufficiently documented, notwithstanding the administrative failure to re-record the deed. Administrative failure, the phrase that had haunted us now being named and neutralized. Walter's tomato stake caught on a leaf outside. He adjusted it, unaware. Under the principle of equitable title, Hawthorne read, the trust is recognized as the beneficial owner of the property at the time of the contested sale. My knees weakened, and I sat down hard in the chair as if my body had been holding itself up on nothing but willpower. Ellen stepped forward, one hand on the back of my chair. Hawthorne, I managed, what does that mean in plain language? It means, he said, voice warm now, the court agrees the house belonged to the trust. Even if the deed wasn't updated, the trust was the real owner. My throat tightened. I didn't cry yet. I couldn't. My body was still processing the shock of being seen and believed by a system that so often feels indifferent. Hawthorne went on. Next, the court finds that Darren Bennett's power of attorney did not convey trustee authority and was therefore insufficient legal basis to sell trust property. The words landed like a clean strike. Insufficient. No authority. Not his to sell. Ellen let out a slow breath through her nose like someone trying not to shout in church. And Cornerstone? I asked, though I already sensed the direction. The court declares the conveyance to Cornerstone Equity Solutions LLC voidable, Hawthorne said. And, Gloria, this is the part you need to hear carefully. My stomach tightened again. Hawthorne's voice slowed, the way it does when the sentence carries consequences you cannot unsay. The court finds probable cause to believe the conveyance was executed with knowledge actual or constructive of the trust's existence, he read, and hereby refers the matter to the Maplewood County Prosecutor's Office for review of potential elder financial exploitation. The room went silent. Not the quiet of waiting. The quiet of impact. Ellen's eyes widened, then narrowed, then filled with something fierce. Outside, Walter's hands stopped moving. He looked up toward the kitchen window, as if he felt the shift in the air. "Hawthorne," I whispered. "That means criminal." "Yes," he said gently. "It means the court is referring it for possible criminal review. You and Walter don't control what the prosecutor decides, but the court believes there is enough concern to warrant it." My chest tightened sharply, not from fear of Darren's consequences, but from grief, because no mother imagines her child's name being spoken in the same breath as exploitation and prosecution. But Darren had done this. Not me. Not the judge. "Darren, what happens to the house?" I asked, my voice sounding far away. "Cornerstone is exposed," Hawthorne explained. "The title is clouded, and now there's a judicial finding. They can't resell cleanly. In my experience, they will likely seek to unwind quickly to limit their liability." "So, we get it back," I said, the words tasting unreal. Hawthorne's voice softened. "Gloria, the court's position is that it never truly left you. We're just forcing the world to recognize what was always true." Ellen squeezed my shoulder. I finally exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding since the lockbox. "Thank you," I whispered. "I'll send you the ruling today," Hawthorne said, "and I'll update you as soon as Cornerstone's counsel responds. One more thing, do not contact Darren. Do not respond to any messages. Let the system move." "Understood," I said. When I ended the call, Ellen didn't speak immediately. She walked to the window and looked out at Walter. He was still on the patio, staring at the tomato plant like it had suddenly become unfamiliar. I stood and went to the back door. Walter turned as I stepped outside. His eyes were wet already. "Well?" he asked, voice shaking. I walked to him and placed both hands on his arms, grounding him the way I had in hospital rooms. "We won," I said softly. Walter blinked hard. "We what?" "The judge ruled," I continued. "She recognized the trust. Darren didn't have authority. The sale is voidable." Walter's face crumpled, and for a second he looked like a boy who had been trying to be brave for too long. Then he cried, quietly. The way he always cried, no heaving, no dramatic sound, just tears sliding down his cheeks as his shoulders shook in small waves. I held him. I didn't speak, because there was nothing adequate to say. Inside, Ellen turned the kettle on. I could hear the click. Walter pulled back slightly, wiping his face with the heel of his hand, embarrassed and relieved all at once. "And Darren?" he asked. I swallowed. The judge referred it to the prosecutor for possible elder exploitation. Walter's mouth tightened. The relief didn't vanish, but it changed shape, becoming heavier, more complicated. "He did this," Walter whispered, as if trying to convince himself he was allowed to accept the consequence. "Yes," I said. "He did." We went back inside. Ellen had already poured water into mugs and placed tea bags like she was preparing for a funeral and a celebration in the same breath. That's how it felt, victory and mourning, sharing a table. My phone buzzed as I sat down. Darren. A text. "Mom, answer me. What did the judge say?" I stared at the screen. My heart did its old trick, wanting to fix, wanting to soothe, wanting to take the sharp edge off a consequence. Then I remembered him laughing on my porch. I remembered his hand yanking my arm. I remembered my mother's hydrangeas crushed under his boot. I remembered Jaden saying, with borrowed certainty, that I didn't live in my own house anymore. I took a screenshot and placed the phone face down. Ellen nodded, approving without words. Minutes later, another text came through. "Cornerstone is threatening me. This is your fault." My jaw tightened. My fault. I wrote the message into the record. Not because I needed it now, Because truth deserves to be preserved even when you've already won the round. That afternoon, Hawthorne called again. Cornerstone's counsel wants to negotiate an unwind, he said. They're not contesting the ruling. They want an orderly resolution. They'll seek recovery from Darren directly. Walter let out a slow breath that sounded like pain and relief mixed together. So it would happen. Not quickly, not magically, but in the real way, through paperwork and signatures and court oversight. Our house, our porch, our oak tree, my broken flower bed was coming back. That evening, Walter went outside again and finished tying the tomato plant. His hands were steadier. Ellen made dinner, and for the first time in weeks, I ate without the food tasting like fear. But even as relief settled into my bones, another truth stood beside it. Winning didn't erase what Darren had done. It didn't unteach the words Jaden had spoken. It didn't rebuild my hydrangeas. Justice had done its part. Now I would have to do mine. Return home, reclaim my ordinary life, and figure out what love looks like when it can no longer be blind. The day after the ruling, Maplewood felt different. Not because the streets had changed, or the trees had grown new leaves overnight, but because I had changed. The fear that had clung to my ribs like a second skin had loosened, and in its place was something steadier, something almost unfamiliar. Not joy, not celebration. A quiet certainty that the world could still be corrected when it went wrong, if you were willing to stand in the discomfort long enough. Cornerstone moved quickly once the ruling landed. Companies like that don't cling to sentiment. They cling to profit and to legal safety, and now they had neither. The court had made the title toxic. The phrase probable cause and elder exploitation had entered the same document as their purchase. No investor likes that kind of paper trail. Richard Hawthorne called mid-morning. I spoke with Cornerstone's counsel, he said. They want an orderly unwind. They're not contesting. They want out. Walter, sitting across from me at Ellen's kitchen table, let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding air for a year instead of a week. What does unwind mean exactly? I asked. It means, Hawthorne said, we reverse the transaction as much as possible. Deed transfers are corrected. Funds are returned. The court oversees the process. Cornerstone will pursue reimbursement from Darren. My stomach tightened at the thought of money moving back and forth like a rope tugging at a wound. And Darren? Walter asked quietly. Hawthorne paused. Darren is dealing with consequences. Cornerstone is already preparing a civil claim to recover what they paid, and the prosecutor's office will likely reach out in the coming weeks. Walter's face pinched. He looked down at his hands. Even after everything, he still didn't enjoy imagining our son cornered. But cornered was what Darren had made inevitable. I thanked Hawthorne and ended the call. Ellen was on the phone with someone too, one of her old contacts, speaking in that clipped tone that meant she was gathering information without sounding like she was gathering information. She hung up and looked at me. The town knows, she said. I figured, I replied. Not rumors this time, Ellen continued. Actual information. People talk when a court ruling hits. Even if they don't read it, they hear about it. Walter shifted uncomfortably. I don't want them celebrating Darren's downfall. Ellen's gaze softened a fraction. They're not celebrating, she said. They're recalibrating. They're realizing you weren't the unreasonable ones. Recalibrating. That was the word. Maplewood had listened to Darren's version for a few days because it was easier than imagining a son could do what he did. Now the law had spoken, and the town would reshape its sympathy accordingly. My phone buzzed again. Darren. Call me. Please. The word please nearly made me flinch. Not because it softened me, but because it revealed what Darren really feared. Not guilt, not God, not even me. He feared consequences he couldn't talk his way out of. I didn't reply. 2 minutes later, another text. They're going to ruin me. Mom, you don't understand what Cornerstone is doing. They're coming after everything. I stared at the screen until the words stopped looking like Darren and started looking like a stranger's panic. Walter watched my face. What did he say? I handed him the phone. Walter read it, then set it down carefully, like it might crack if he handled it too roughly. He's scared, Walter said again. Yes, I replied, but he's still blaming. That was the tell. Darren wasn't saying, I'm sorry. He was saying, you did this to me. Ellen took the phone, looked, and nodded once. Save it, she said. Do not answer. Walter rubbed his forehead. What about Brenda? As if summoned by his question, my phone buzzed again. Brenda this time. Gloria? We need to talk. Darren is spiraling. The kids are scared. I read it once and felt the familiar hook of guilt tug at my insides. The kids. Always the kids. And maybe they were scared. Maybe they'd overheard a fight. Maybe Darren's temper had turned the house into a storm zone. Maybe Brenda was exhausted and trying to control damage the way women often do when men create chaos. I understood her, in a way. But understanding doesn't mean surrendering. Ellen leaned over my shoulder, read the message, and said quietly, Brenda is trying to manage Darren. She's not trying to protect you. She's protecting the household, Walter murmured. Yes, Ellen said, not you. I typed one sentence and showed it to Ellen before sending, because the line between compassion and vulnerability is thin when you're tired. Brenda, all communication goes through our attorney. Then I hit send. My hand trembled slightly afterward. Not from fear, from the strange grief of drawing a boundary where love used to flow freely. That afternoon, Hawthorne emailed the draft unwind agreement. Ellen printed it immediately like it was homework that couldn't wait. The documents were dense, full of legal language designed to eliminate ambiguity. It was all so clinical compared to the deeply personal way a home lives inside you. It listed our address like it was inventory. It described the transfer like it was a math problem. But I didn't resent the clinical tone. Clinical is how the law keeps itself from collapsing under emotion. Walter read the first page, then set it down and stared at the table. So they'll sign it, he said. Cornerstone will sign, and then we get the deed back. Yes, I replied. And Darren pays them back, he said, voice tight. Cornerstone will pursue that, I corrected gently. Not us. Walter nodded but didn't look relieved. He looked hollow. Because winning against your child feels different than winning against a stranger. The victory tastes like metal. Evening brought another call from Hawthorne. The prosecutor's office has opened a review file, he said. They may request interviews. They may request documents. I'll be present for anything formal. Walter's face tightened. So it's really happening. It may, Hawthorne replied. The referral is not a charge, but it's serious. The judge rarely includes language like that unless she sees clear indicators. Clear indicators. Like my bruise. Like the signature Darren forgot. Like the sale price. Like the lies told on record. After the call, Walter went outside and stood on Ellen's patio for a long time without doing anything, just standing. I went out quietly and joined him. The sky was pink and soft. Someone in the neighborhood was grilling. The smell of charcoal and meat drifted across the yard. Walter spoke without looking at me. Do you remember Darren at 10? He asked. Yes, I said. He used to carry that little plastic toolbox around, Walter murmured. Said he was helping me fix things. He'd hand me screws like they were treasure. My throat tightened. Walter continued, voice thick. How did we get from that to this? I didn't have an answer that could make it hurt less. So I told the truth I did have. We didn't choose this, I said softly, but we're choosing what we teach with it. Walter finally looked at me. His eyes were wet but steady. And what are we teaching? I thought of Jaden's text messages, his fear, his loyalty pulled like a rope between adults. I thought of my mother's hydrangeas, crushed because Darren needed to hurt something sacred to prove he could. I thought of the judge's words, elder exploitation spoken calmly, like naming a disease so it could be treated. We're teaching, I said, that love doesn't mean you let someone destroy you. Walter nodded slowly. And what about forgiveness? The question hung between us, heavy. I didn't answer quickly. Forgiveness in American culture is often treated like a moral trophy, something you earn by being the bigger person. But older women like me know a quieter truth. Forgiveness without accountability is just permission. I don't know what forgiveness looks like yet, I admitted. But I know what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like pretending this didn't happen. Walter's jaw tightened, then relaxed. He exhaled slowly. Inside, Ellen called us for dinner. Meatloaf again, because Ellen believed consistency was comfort. At the table, my phone buzzed one more time. A message from Jaden. Dad said we might have to move. My chest ached, not because Darren was suffering, because Jaden was. I typed carefully, slow enough to keep my anger from bleeding into the words. I'm sorry you're worried. Adults sometimes make choices that have consequences. No matter where you live, I love you and Grandpa loves you. That won't change. I sent it and set the phone down. Walter stared at his plate. "He'll blame you," he whispered, meaning Darren, meaning the whole household. "Yes," I said. "He will." Ellen's voice was steady. "Let him. The law doesn't run on blame. It runs on facts." Later that night, Ellen went to bed early. Walter sat in the living room watching the news without really seeing it. I sat at the kitchen table with the unwind agreement in front of me, pen in hand, reading every clause twice. When you've been betrayed through paperwork, you learn to respect every word. I signed where Hawthorne told me to sign. Walter signed too, slower, his hand shaking slightly. When he finished, he set the pen down as if it weighed 100 pounds. "It's coming back," he said softly. "Yes," I replied, but I knew the truth. The house was coming back. The family we thought we had was not. Not in the same shape, not with the same innocence. And that was the real unraveling, not just of a fraudulent sale, but of the story we'd told ourselves about who Darren was and what love guaranteed. The locksmith arrived on a Tuesday morning. It felt strange to write that sentence, as if I were describing a service call for a broken appliance instead of the reopening of my life. Richard Hawthorne had coordinated the timing carefully. Cornerstone signed the unwind agreement. The court entered the corrective order. Funds were placed into escrow pending final reconciliation. Paper moved first, then keys. The house, legally, had never stopped being ours. But you don't feel that in your bones until you stand on the porch again. Walter wore the same gray jacket he'd worn to court. Though the day was warm, he said it felt appropriate. I didn't argue. Some clothing becomes armor. Ellen insisted on coming. "I'm not missing this," she said flatly. We drove down Birchwood Lane slowly, the way you drive past a hospital where something important happened. The oak tree came into view first, broad, steady, unchanged. Then the wraparound porch. The window boxes were empty now. The real estate sign was gone. But the house stood. My house. The locksmith's truck was already parked at the curb. A young man in a navy shirt with a company logo waited by the front door. A property inspector stood nearby, clipboard in hand. Hawthorne arrived moments later, briefcase tucked under his arm like a habit he couldn't break. "Morning, Gloria," he said gently. I nodded. I couldn't trust my voice yet. Walter stepped out of the car slowly. He stood for a second, just looking at the porch, as if expecting the house to accuse him of leaving. Ellen touched his elbow. "You're home," she said. The locksmith approached, polite and professional. "Mrs. Bennett?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He held up a small tool kit. "I'll remove the lockbox and replace the cylinder. You'll have fresh keys." Fresh keys. The phrase hit harder than I expected. I walked up the porch steps. Each one creaked in a familiar way. I had memorized those creaks over 42 years. They were like the rhythm of my own breathing. The lockbox hung on the doorknob, black and impersonal. I stared at it for a second longer than necessary. It had been the symbol of our humiliation, the proof that strangers had authority over what was ours. The locksmith clipped it off with efficient movements, metal against metal, a dull snap. He removed the old cylinder and replaced it with a new one. His hands were quick, competent, no emotion, just work. When he finished, he handed me 2 keys. I held them in my palm. They were light, too light for what they represented. Walter stood beside me. "Go on," he whispered. I slid the key into the lock. For one breath, my hand hesitated. Not because I feared what was inside. Because I understood that opening this door would confirm everything that had happened. It would make the past week real in a way that even court rulings hadn't. I turned the key. The lock clicked. The sound was ordinary. The door opened inward. The house smelled like itself. Wood. Old books. Faint dust. A trace of whatever cleaner Cornerstone's contractor had used during their brief possession. I stepped inside first. The living room stood as it always had. The sofa in its place, the lamp near the window, the small indentation in the carpet where Walter's recliner had pressed for years. Nothing looked violated, and yet everything had been. Walter entered behind me, his breath hitched. Ellen followed quietly, giving us space but staying close enough to catch either of us if we fell. The inspector walked through with us, documenting condition for the record. He checked walls, fixtures, appliances. He spoke occasionally, noting minor scuffs, verifying there had been no structural changes. His clipboard scratched softly against paper. I moved toward the hallway. The photographs were still there. Every one of them. Our wedding photo. Darren at 5 holding a plastic baseball bat. Darren at 10 with his little toolbox. Darren at 18, cap and gown slightly crooked, smiling like the future belonged to him. I reached out and touched the frame. Walter stood beside me. "He was good once," he said, voice barely audible. "He was young," I corrected softly. In the kitchen, the countertops were bare. Someone had cleared away a few items, our mail, a bowl that had once held fruit, but the bones of the room were unchanged. I walked to the back door and opened it. The backyard lay quiet under the sun. The vegetable garden bed was dry but intact. The oak tree cast the same wide shadow across the grass. And then I saw it. The flower bed, my hydrangeas. Where once there had been thick green leaves and full blue blooms, there were now broken stems and patches of churned soil. The plants Darren had crushed had not recovered. A few stubborn leaves clung to life at the edges, but the center was ruined. I stepped down into the yard slowly. Walter followed. Ellen stayed near the door, watching us. I knelt. The soil was dry beneath my fingers. I touched one of the broken stems, and it snapped easily in my hand. This is where he had stood. This is where he had shouted. This is where I had thrown my body between his anger and my mother's memory. My shoulder throbbed faintly as if remembering. Walter crouched beside me with effort. His knees were not what they once were. "I'll replant them," he said quietly. "We'll replant." I nodded. "Yes," I said, "we will. Not because hydrangeas fix betrayal, but because tending something living reminds you that destruction is not the final word." Behind us, Hawthorne stepped into the yard. "The paperwork will finalize within a week," he said gently, "but legally, possession is restored." I stood slowly. "Thank you," I told him. He nodded once, understanding that gratitude in moments like this is larger than fees or filings. Before leaving, the inspector handed me his report. "Property appears intact," he said. "Minimal cosmetic damage. Nothing structural." Structural. He meant beams and pipes. He did not mean family. When everyone else left, Ellen insisted on staying for a while. "I'll make coffee," she said, as if it were any other Tuesday. Walter sat at the kitchen table, hands flat on the wood. He looked around slowly, as if reacquainting himself with an old friend who had been briefly kidnapped. I opened the cabinet and found our mugs exactly where they had always been. Ordinary life. So fragile. So resilient. As the coffee brewed, I walked through the house one more time alone. Bedroom, closet, study. My books stood untouched on their shelves. I pulled down my mother's first edition, careful, reverent, and held it for a moment before placing it back. We were home. And yet, something had shifted permanently. This house was no longer just where we had lived. It was now where we had fought, where we had refused to disappear, where the law had drawn a line and said, "This far, and no further." My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Darren." "They're charging me, Mom." The prosecutor called my lawyer. I closed my eyes briefly. The line had moved from civil to criminal. The system was doing what systems do when documents and intent collide. I showed the message to Walter. His face went pale. "They're really doing it," he whispered. "Yes," I said. Ellen set 3 mugs on the table and read the message over my shoulder. "He made this choice," she said quietly. "Not you." I stared at the screen. For a split second, the old instinct surged up. Call him, calm him, tell him we'd talk to someone, find a way to soften the blow. Then I remembered the porch, the laugh, the word homeless, the boot in my hydrangeas, the hand that shoved me aside. Love does not require you to block consequences. I typed one sentence. "You need to speak to your lawyer." I sent it. Walter watched me. "That's all?" he asked. "That's all," I said, because at some point, motherhood stops being rescue and becomes witness. We drank our coffee in the kitchen, where so many ordinary mornings had begun. Outside, the oak tree swayed gently in the breeze. The house held us again. But this time, it held a different version of us, older, bruised, steadier. We had come home. Now we would have to learn how to live here without pretending nothing had happened. The prosecutor didn't call me directly. They called Darren's lawyer first, the way systems do when they want to stay clean and procedural. But news travels in families the way smoke travels in old houses through vents, under doors, into every room whether you invite it or not. 2 days after we walked back into Birchwood Lane, Darren's text sat on my phone like a live wire. "They're charging me, Mom." The prosecutor called my lawyer. Walter read it twice, then set the phone down as if it might burn him. "I don't want him in prison," he said quietly. I looked at my husband. He was sitting at our kitchen table again, the same table where he'd eaten my pot roast for decades, the same table where Darren once did homework, the same table where Jaden had learned a card trick last spring. Walter's voice shook slightly. "I want consequences," he added. I don't want prison." Ellen, standing by the sink, didn't soften her face. "Walter," she said, "prison isn't something you choose. It's something the state decides when it believes a crime occurred." Walter swallowed. Still, I understood him. I understood the strange grief of wanting justice and still wanting to protect the person who harmed you because the bond didn't dissolve just because the betrayal was real. But the law had taken the wheel now. That was part of what we'd asked for when we refused to stay silent. That afternoon, Richard Hawthorne came to the house with an envelope of documents. He didn't sit down at first. He stood in our living room, looking around as if checking that we were truly back, that the lockbox was truly gone. "Cornerstone has executed the final transfer," he said. "The deed is corrected. Title is clean in the trust's name. You're officially restored." Walter exhaled, almost soundless. Hawthorne continued. "Now, about the referral." My stomach tightened. "The Maplewood County Prosecutor's Office has opened a formal investigation," he said. "They've requested copies of filings and trust documentation. Darren has retained counsel for the criminal side as well. Douglas Prior is staying on." Ellen's mouth tightened. "Of course he is." Walter looked up. "What does Darren face?" Hawthorne didn't dramatize. "If charged under the elder exploitation statutes, it can range from misdemeanor to felony depending on the amount and circumstances. The sale price and intent will matter. The fact he used a power of attorney will matter." Walter's fingers tapped once on the tabletop, a nervous habit he hadn't had in years. "And us?" Walter asked. "Will we have to testify?" "Possibly," Hawthorne said, "but not immediately. Many cases resolve by plea. Darren may be motivated to avoid a public trial." Avoid. That word fit Darren's pattern like a glove. He didn't fear wrongdoing. He feared exposure. 2 days later, Darren called. Not a text, not a voicemail, an actual call. I was watering the remnants of my flower bed, trying to keep the surviving edges of hydrangea alive until I could replant. The hose water ran over my hands, cool and steady. I shut the nozzle off when I heard my phone ringing inside. Walter was in the den listening to the radio. I stared at the screen. Darren. My thumb hovered over decline. Then I thought of Jaden, of the boy's messages, frightened and confused, of the gap between his world and mine. I answered. "Hello," I said. Darren's voice sounded different immediately. Not charming, not angry, tired. "Mom," he said, and the word landed like a stone dropped into water. I waited. He exhaled. "They're charging me," he said, like he hadn't already texted it, like saying it out loud might make it less real. "I heard," I replied. A pause. "I didn't think it would go this far." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "You sell your parents' home and strike your mother, and you don't think it will go far." But I didn't laugh. I said only, "You did it anyway." His breath hitched slightly. "Cornerstone is suing me. They want their money back. They're freezing accounts. Brenda is—" He stopped, then started again. "The kids are scared." There it was again. The kids. The same lever, but weaker now, as if even Darren could feel how worn it was from overuse. "Jaden texted me," I said quietly. "He's worried you'll have to move." Darren's voice sharpened for a second. "Because we might." "And whose fault is that?" I asked, my tone calm but cutting. Silence. Then, very softly, Darren said something I had not heard from him since this began. I messed up. The words were small. They didn't carry apology yet. They carried recognition. Walter must have heard my voice through the open den door because he appeared in the hallway, watching me carefully, not speaking. I kept my voice steady. "You didn't just mess up," I said. "You made a choice. Multiple choices." I was desperate, Darren said quickly, old habit rising like a reflex. You don't understand the pressure. Don't, I said firmer now. Don't dress it up. I understand pressure. I taught in public schools for 31 years. I understand being scared. I understand being tired. Pressure didn't make you laugh on my porch, Darren. His breathing changed on the line. I didn't mean, you meant what you did, I said. And you meant what you said to Jaden about me. That landed hard. I could hear it in the silence that followed. Walter's eyes were wet. He stood in the hallway like he was holding himself back from stepping into the conversation, from begging Darren to be better. Finally, Darren said, "They offered a plea." My stomach tightened again. "What kind?" "Misdemeanor," he said, voice low. "Probation, restitution, no jail time if I comply." Walter let out a small sound, half relief, half grief. I said nothing for a moment, because even that felt like a mercy Darren hadn't earned but might receive anyway, the way justice sometimes compromises in exchange for closure. "You should take it," I said finally. Darren's voice cracked slightly. "You want me to plead guilty?" "I want you to tell the truth," I replied. "However the law requires it." He exhaled like he'd been punched. "Brenda thinks, if I plead, everyone will see me as what you were," I said softly. Walter stepped closer, his voice trembling. "Son," he said quietly, and Darren went still on the line because he hadn't expected Walter to speak. Walter swallowed. "Darren, I don't know what happened to you. I don't. But I want you to stop digging. Take the plea. Make it right as much as you can." For a long second, Darren didn't answer. Then he said, almost inaudible, "Okay." It wasn't redemption. It was surrender to reality. Sometimes that's the first step. After the call ended, Walter stood very still, as if afraid movement would break something fragile in the air. He sounded different, Walter whispered. "Yes," I said. "Do you think he meant it?" Walter asked. "I think he meant he's scared," I said honestly. "I don't know yet if he means he's sorry." Walter nodded slowly, accepting the difference. The plea agreement moved forward quickly after that. We didn't attend court for it. Hawthorne advised against it. "You've done your part," he said. "Let the system do the rest." We received updates through him. Darren would plead to a misdemeanor theft-related charge connected to exploitation, receive a suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, and a formal restitution order. Cornerstone's civil claim would continue separately, likely resulting in a judgment Darren would spend years paying. Darren lost the Audi within a month. It had been a lease he could no longer carry. I learned it the Maplewood way by overhearing 2 women at the pharmacy whispering near the greeting cards. "Did you hear? Darren Bennett had his car repossessed." I kept my face neutral and paid for Walter's prescriptions without comment. Brenda and Darren sold their newer subdivision house quietly. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment across town. Again, I didn't seek the information. It came to me through the porous walls of a town that never completely forgets. Jaden's messages became less accusatory and more cautious. "Are you really okay now? Did the judge take the house back? Grandpa's heart okay?" I answered each one with care. Short, honest, loving. "Yes, sweetheart. We're home again. Grandpa is taking his medicine and resting. I love you." One evening in late October, after the plea paperwork was finalized, Walter and I sat on our porch. The sun dropped behind the oak tree, and the first cool edge of fall slid into the air. Walter held a mug of tea. His hands were steadier now. "It's over," he said softly. I watched the street. A neighbor walked past with a dog. Someone's porch light clicked on. The world returned to its ordinary rhythm, as if extraordinary betrayal could be folded away like laundry. "It's not over," I said quietly. "It's just decided." Walter nodded slowly. "And what about us?" he asked. "With him?" I didn't answer immediately because the truth had more than one layer. There was the legal ending, and then there was the emotional aftermath, which doesn't follow court schedules. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I know this. What happened can't be unhappened. We can only decide what grows in its place." Walter's eyes moved to the flower bed. The destroyed center was still bare, but I had already begun replanting around it new soil, new shoots, small green promises. "Something will grow," Walter said. "Yes," I replied. "It will. Not because Darren deserved it, but because I did." The first night we slept in our own bed again, I woke up at 2:17 a.m. out of habit, not fear. The house was quiet in the way a long-loved house is quiet, settled, familiar, protective. The air conditioner clicked softly. The oak tree outside brushed a branch against the window like a gentle reminder that time kept moving no matter what people did to each other. Walter was asleep beside me, his breathing even. I lay there staring into the dark, listening for the old sounds I knew by heart. The refrigerator's hum, the faint creak in the hallway when the wood cooled, the distant whisper of cars on Maplewood's main road. I realized then that home isn't just a structure you own. Home is the place where your body knows how to rest. That was what Darren had tried to steal. Not just a deed, not just an address. Rest. The next morning, Walter rose early and walked out to the backyard with a cup of coffee. I watched him from the kitchen window. His shoulders were less hunched now. He moved with the slow confidence of someone who had been knocked down and stood back up without needing applause. I made oatmeal the way I always did, cinnamon, a little brown sugar, sliced bananas, ordinary breakfast, radical in its ordinariness after what we'd been through. When Walter came back inside, he looked at the flower bed. I had replanted around the destroyed center. Not hydrangeas, yet those would come later, when the soil had been turned properly and the season was right. For now, I'd placed fresh mulch, a few small shrubs, and a new stone marker beside my mother's plaque. The ruined spot was still visible. I hadn't tried to hide it. That was important. Not every wound needs to be covered to heal. Walter set his mug down and stood beside me. "It looks hopeful," he said softly. "It's not finished," I replied. "No," he agreed, "but it started. That was the truth of our whole life now. Started again. Not rewound, not restored to innocence. Restarted with eyes open. The weeks that followed were filled with small repairs that felt strangely intimate. Walter fixed the porch step that had been loose for years. I washed the curtains. We repainted the kitchen a soft, warm yellow I'd wanted forever but never made time for. We replaced the lock, not because the locksmith's lock was wrong, but because I needed to choose something myself again, my own small act of control. Ellen came for dinner every other Friday like she had promised. She brought a bottle of wine and a brisk energy that filled the rooms without demanding anything from us. "Still standing?" she asked, the first Friday she came over. "Still standing," Walter said. "Good," she replied, and that was her version of affection. The community shifted too, slowly. Some neighbors avoided the subject entirely, as if naming it might invite similar disaster into their own homes. Others offered quiet kindness, casseroles left on the porch, invitations to coffee, a hand on my shoulder at church with eyes that said, "I heard, and I'm sorry." One morning at the grocery store, Carol Jensen found me again near the produce aisle. Her expression was less curious this time, more respectful. "I heard the court ruled in your favor," she said quietly. "Yes," I answered. Carol nodded, then lowered her voice. "People were wrong to talk," I held her gaze. "People talk because they're afraid," I said. "They want to believe it can't happen to them." Carol swallowed. "Can it?" "Yes," I said plainly. "It can." That honesty startled her. I saw it in her face. But older women don't have the luxury of pretending. We've seen too much. Walter's cardiologist adjusted his medication, and Walter began walking again, slowly building endurance like a man rebuilding trust in his own body. Some days he walked to the corner and back. Some days he made it around the block. Every step was an argument against fear. And Darren? Darren disappeared from our daily life, the way someone disappears after a scandal. Quietly, reluctantly, with shame clinging to him like smoke. The plea agreement became a fact people knew but didn't speak of directly. Misdemeanor, probation, restitution. The civil judgment from Cornerstone followed soon after, numbers so large they didn't feel real until you imagine a man paying them month after month while his children watch him count. He moved into a smaller apartment. He lost his car. He returned to a lower-level sales job. Maplewood noticed. Maplewood always notices. But I didn't follow his life like a spectator. I didn't call. I didn't ask for updates. He had taken enough of my attention already. I focused on what mattered. Rebuilding our days, protecting Walter's health, repairing the ways our home had been psychologically invaded. Then, in May, almost a full year after we returned from Portugal to a lockbox and a real estate sign, my phone rang. Darren. A real call, not a text. Walter was in the backyard tying up tomato plants, his shoulders in that familiar line of concentration. I stood in the kitchen holding a dish towel, staring at my phone as if it were a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. I answered anyway. "Mom," Darren said. His voice was quieter than I remembered. Not because he was trying to sound humble, because life had stripped away the swagger he used as armor. I didn't speak at first. Neither did he. Then he cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were simple. No justifications. No pressure. No mention of my flowers or Walter's heart or the kids as leverage. Just, "I'm sorry." My chest tightened. Not with forgiveness, with recognition that this was the first time he'd offered something that sounded like truth instead of strategy. "I know," I said. I did not say it's okay, because it wasn't. We talked for 7 minutes. Not about the case, not about the court, not about the money. We talked about Kyle's school play, about Sophia's drawing, about Walter's tomatoes. Darren told me in a flat voice that he was going to meetings now 12-step, he said, and he didn't sound proud of it. He sounded tired, the way people sound when they've finally admitted they can't outsmart their own addiction. I listened. When the call ended, I set the phone down and walked outside. Walter looked up from the tomato plants. "That was him," he said, not a question. "Yes," I replied. Walter waited, eyes gentle, patient. "He said he was sorry," I said. Walter's breath left him slowly, like a man releasing a weight he'd carried too long. "Is it better?" he asked. I looked at the oak tree, at the sunlight on the grass, at the edge of the flower bed where the new plants were settling in. "No," I said honestly. "It's different." Walter nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. Some things, once broken, don't return to the same shape. They become something new, sometimes smaller, sometimes stronger, sometimes both. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the neighborhood settle into its twilight routine, mailboxes closing, sprinklers ticking, porch lights flicking on one by one. I thought about the lesson I wish I'd learned sooner. The people who count on your silence are counting on your fear. Darren counted on both. He thought I would be too ashamed to tell anyone we were displaced, too soft to fight, too tired to understand documents, too scared to endure the slow grind of the law. He was wrong. Not because I was powerful, because I was prepared, patient, and unwilling to mistake love for surrender. Love is not letting someone destroy you. Love is also refusing to teach the next generation that cruelty works. I didn't win because the world is fair. The world isn't fair. I won because I took one careful action and then another one, phone call, one document, one boundary, and I kept going when it would have been easier to collapse. In the end, home wasn't just returned, it was redefined. It became the place where I learned that dignity can survive betrayal, that justice can arrive late but still arrive, and that even at 66, you can draw a line and mean it. I looked down at my hands, older hands, steady hands, hands that had held students' essays and my husband's heart medication and the broken stem of a hydrangea. Then I looked up at my house. My real house. Not just the building. The life inside it. And I sat there, in the soft Ohio evening, knowing that ordinary life chosen deliberately and protected fiercely is one of the bravest things a person can fight for. The lesson I learned is this. Love without boundaries is not kindness, it is permission for harm. Family does not mean silence, and forgiveness does not mean surrender. When someone counts on your fear to control you, the most powerful thing you can do is take one steady, deliberate step toward truth. Justice may be slow, uncomfortable, and painfully public, but dignity is worth protecting. In the end, standing up for yourself does not destroy a family the wrongdoing does. And sometimes the bravest act of love is refusing to let betrayal define your worth.